Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Sean O'Connell Show. Glad to have you with us here on ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM. The show today and every day is brought to you by our friends at Les Schwab Tires. They got tires, wheels, accessories, air fresheners. They've got it all for whatever it is you drive. Stop by any of the many locations up and down the Wasatch Front. Les Schwab will get the job done right the very first time. James Peterson is producing today. I am excited to tell you we have a jam-packed show. Tom Callahan talking NHL playoffs. That's coming in 30 minutes. Scott Mitchell and Devin Jackson in our noon hour to talk about all things football and especially the NFL draft. Rafael Barlow, same thing. We're going to have a lot of fun on the show today. Some NHL playoffs, some NBA playoffs. But, of course, the big thing that happened over the weekend that had at least some significant local tie to it was the NFL draft. And when I say significant local tie to it, I mean actually far less significant than any of us would have wished for. I set the over-under. What an idiot am I? I set the over-under on how many players with local connections would be drafted at 6.5. And I, admittedly, in my mind, was thinking, yeah, all right. Well, I was thinking about the local universities. I was thinking Utah, BYU, Utah State, Weber State, Southern Utah. You know how many the number came out to be? I wasn't even factoring in the Jackson Darts of the world with the high school connections. You know how much? I said 6.5, over under 6.5. And the under, because you are smart people, the under answer won in the survey. Over or under 6.5 draft picks from the state of Utah. The under hit. All right. 80% of people said it would be the under. The under hit. 2 guys from local universities were drafted. Jalen Royals from Utah State and Caleb Lohner, the 4-catch, 4-touchdown, 1 year of football, former big-time basketball prospect Caleb Lohner from the University of Utah drafted. A dismal year for draft in the state. Tyler Batty, undrafted free agent signing. Karene Reed, Junior Tafuna, Connor O'Toole, Zamiah Vaughn, a bunch of these guys. And I put poll questions out basically regarding each of those individuals because I really want to know your thoughts. At Real OC Sports, 877-353-0700. Tell me what surprised you about the draft, what didn't. We're going to get into the drama and the soap opera of the Sanders family here in just a second, but the local interest is more interesting for me. Mekhi Bernard, another guy. Okay, so who's going to stick in the NFL? Caleb Lohner is a 7th-round pick, a late pick. You're effectively an undrafted free agent. The percentages on whether or not you get signed as a 7th-round pick versus whether or not you get signed as an undrafted free agent are remarkably similar. So they're taking a flyer on Caleb Lohner, and that's awesome. Like it's fun to see that. It's great to see somebody giving it a chance. And the Broncos, that's the right team to do it. Young squad on the rise. A great place for Karene Reed also to land, I think. So Caleb Lohner picked 241. There were 257 picks in the draft this year, if I'm not mistaken. Pick 241 is Caleb Lohner to the Broncos. I like it. It doesn't mean that they're like madly in love with him, but a team taking a flyer on a guy that athletic with that upside potential makes a lot of sense. Connor O'Toole, undrafted free agent, headed to the Seattle Seahawks. I can never get on board with the Seattle Seahawks, but I'm hoping that Connor O'Toole has a long and fruitful career in professional football. Mekhi Bernard is going to Tennessee. He'll be playing for the Titans. Cody Barton was acquired by Tennessee in this offseason. Nashville is one of my favorite cities in the United States of America. Great place to live. I think, could be a fit for Mekhi Bernard, although they've been set at running back in recent years. Zamiah Vaughn is headed to the Great White North. He'll be playing indoors, though, for the Minnesota Vikings if he can make that roster. Karene Reed, as I mentioned, a Bronco as of now, and Junior Tafuna, a Houston Texan, as an undrafted free agent. So which of those guys is most likely to stick? How likely are those guys to stick? I crafted a Twitter poll for each, all right? What is the pro football future of Mekhi Bernard? Active NFL roster, NFL practice squad, UFL, which is the spring league, which is the alternative league, or regular job? Same question for Zemiah Vaughn. Same question for Connor O'Toole. A guy whose name you probably noticed I did not mention, Brant Keithy. No announcement yet as to whether or not he's signing anywhere, getting a mini camp invite, anything like that. Brant Keithy, though, I think you still have to ask the question. At the very, very least, he should be able to pursue professional football opportunities, even if it is in the UFL. I mean, somebody sent me this weekend video of Samson Nakua getting in a fight with a fan at like the Michigan Panthers game. And all respect to Samson Nakua, but Brant Keithy is a much better football player than Samson Nakua. So if he has been able to stick on a roster, then Brant obviously should be able to. Look, Cam Rising could play in that league 100% if that's something that he wanted to do. And I know that the upward mobility from those leagues to the NFL, it's not exactly the pipeline that college football is, but it is an opportunity to keep playing. So what's the pro football future for Brant Keithy? Active NFL roster, practice squad, UFL, regular job. Van Fillinger, another guy that we talked about on the show that performed well at the Big 12 Pro Day, and yet no announcement that I have seen yet on whether or not he's signing an undrafted free agent deal with any of these NFL teams. He's going to get his cup of coffee, or he should. Tyler Batty, same question. The only BYU guy that I really asked the question about. I think that Caleb Etienne, I thought he might get drafted because, again, we're talking about upside. That's a 6'7" monster with long arms. Like, he's headed to Cincinnati. He's going to be a Bengal as an undrafted free agent. But you're telling me at 6'7", 320, no one wanted to try out a 7th-round pick on Caleb Etienne? It's wild to me. It was just a really bad draft for the locals. Pro football future for Caleb Lohner, also active NFL roster, practice squad, UFL, regular job. Answer for all of those. And then I also put it out there, which of the Utah undrafted free agents that I consider to be the most likely that will actually be on an active NFL roster? Zemiah Vaughn, Karene Reed, Junior Tafuna, Mekhi Bernard. Which of those guys do you think ends up on an active NFL roster? 877-353-0700, how you always get a hold of us. At Real OC Sports is the way that you can find me on Twitter to respond to all those poll questions. Before we move on to the drama, the soap opera, the Days of Our Lives version of the NFL draft this past weekend, James Peterson, any one of those people in particular shock you that they were not drafted, or that you're like, I absolutely know he's going to be an active NFL roster guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think Junior Tafuna is the guy that shocked all of us here locally, was that whether you're a BYU fan, Utah State fan, whatever, I think we all expected him to be a draft pick this year because we got great reports from what he did at Senior Bowl practices, in interviews, in the actual football drills and things that they do at the Senior Bowl. Great reports from that. He had really good numbers for a guy his size and at his position, defensive tackle, at the Combine. You check both those boxes, you're a draft pick, OC. So that shocked me that he didn't get drafted. Does not shock me that he was one of the handful of guys that was immediately signed to an undrafted free agent contract. I believe he will stick. As far as the rest of those guys that we didn't necessarily expect to be drafted, but I believe will be on an NFL or a UFL roster, I'm going to say I would have said Van Fillinger going into the draft, OC, but the fact that he has not signed a deal yet gives me pause on that. So I suppose I'll say Karene Reed because he's another guy we expected to be drafted. I wasn't as sure about he's a surefire draft pick like Junior Tafuna, though. I figured he probably will get drafted, but wouldn't have been surprised if he didn't.
Look, I think that Van is a better football player than Connor O'Toole, for example, and they both had some injuries. I think that Connor is twitchier and had some interesting athleticism scores with the big vertical.
Like
and
maybe he's the upside pick, right?
I also think people are just like, oh, he was a wide receiver at some point, and there's just like this kind of like attachment to where we get enamored with like this guy was like he's the basketball player, wide receiver, like put some weight on him and see what happens. Van Fillinger, you look at Van Fillinger and you're just like, that's a football player, and that's someone who's always been a football player. That kid was born to be a football player. I hope he ends up somewhere. And by the way, the UFL, not a bad gig for a lot of these guys right now. Like, it's not the glamour and the sexiness of the NFL. It's as close to like a G League contract as you can get, but it allows these individuals, remember, a lot of these guys are 21, 22 years old. It allows them to keep playing football. Now, if you're Brant Keithy, I don't know what the decision you're making on this, because Brant made more money in the last couple of years of college football than most people do in their first 5 to 10 years of employment outside of college. So I don't know how that changes the calculus. I don't know how desperate you are to play a game that has continually just ravaged your body. I wish them all well. A very, very strange draft for the locals in the NFL. Please respond to all of our polls at Real OC Sports on Twitter.
Before we move on, OC, we just had a texter ask about any word on Dorian Singer. There was an NFL analyst who is saying that he is talking with the Raiders. No deal yet, but the Raiders are talking with Dorian Singer. So if you're curious about Dorian Singer, like our texter there, look to Vegas, see what they do with the former Utah wideout. They also added that the reason why he wasn't drafted and really considered by any of the teams in any of the rounds was because he had a poor performance in the pro day, and they all learned that was the day he learned he wasn't going to get his eligibility waiver. So that he wasn't in the right headspace to perform very well, clearly,
look,
and the results didn't go in his favor. But
I also think
maybe
he
with the
wasn't
Raiders.
preparing. Like, I think that he found out, oh, crap, he thought he had months to get ready for a season. And instead it was like, hey, you're the most important job interview you're ever going to have is tomorrow. Have you been preparing for it? There's just no way that he was preparing and he turned in those numbers. I refuse to believe that. So
I would agree with that.
That was a bad decision on his part, by the way. You should always like hedge your bets, and you should have been preparing the whole way. But I think they were confident he was going to get an eligibility waiver. And anyway, okay, so the big story, 2025, for better or worse, and I think mostly worse, is going to be remembered as the Shedeur Sanders draft. Despite the fact that he was a fifth-round pick, it is going to be remembered as the Shedeur Sanders draft because there was no bigger story in this draft than Shedeur. There's no bigger story around the draft than Shedeur and the Sanders family. And by the way, what an awkward and embarrassing time to find out as an individual, certainly, but also by extension, kind of as a family, that the community you care most about their opinions, the football community, I think it's probably safe to say, is the community, like not media, right? But teams, pros, GMs, owners, coaches. If you're going to find people that Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders and Shiloh Sanders and Deion Jr. that they actually want to be accepted by. I don't think they care about what we say. I think genuinely they are like, media members are not worth our time, especially media members of a certain ilk and from certain places.
Especially Sean O'Connell.
I think they're probably just like, don't care about what this guy has to say. I would be willing to bet serious money that the Sanders family wants to be valued and respected and appreciated and loved by the NFL, the actual NFL. Not the media or fans around the NFL, but the NFL itself. And what a terrible time and a terrible way to find out that they don't like your shtick either. That half the country doesn't really like what you're doing, and a big portion of that half of the country happens to be the professional community that matters most to your future and most to your success. The NFL, in a way that probably for the first and second rounds, I have to admit to you, I supported. And then when you got into the third, fourth, and fifth, I was like, oh, this is bad. This is awkward. I think I was like, yeah, it makes sense. And then it got to a point where it didn't make a lot of sense to me because I've made it pretty clear. I'm not impressed with Shedeur Sanders as an individual away from football. He's a good football player. Is he a great football player? Is he going to be Tom Brady? I'm not here to tell you that. I'm not a good enough quarterback evaluator to tell you that. Was he a better quarterback than some of the guys taken in front of him, production-wise, and even just, like, watch the game film-wise? Yes, he was. Like, did he, quote-unquote, deserve to drop as far as he did? I also think the answer to that is true, yes, because of some of the stories we were hearing about Shedeur Sanders. But what a time to find out that the community that you actually might care about doesn't like you. That sucks. And to do it in such a public way and to have cameras, other cameras, and your own cameras. It's like standing in front of a mirror while all of your friends, all the people that you wish respected you, tell you that they don't. That has got to be damaging to a young man's mental health. And again, not a big Shedeur Sanders fan, but the idea that the NFL judges more harshly the fact that he's pretty egotistical and that he built a custom draft room and that he's more focused on his jewelry than he is on the interviews with the coaches. They judge that more harshly than guys who had like actual history of domestic violence before drafting them. Actual history of running away from the police. Like we have on video Baker Mayfield trying to run away from the cops. All right? And Baker Mayfield was not treated this way in the draft. Joe Mixon, who's still on NFL rosters in college, is on tape punching a woman in the face hard. And the NFL is just like, yeah, but that's in his past. The NFL needs to know where its goalposts are. I just want to make that point. The Sanders family, though, the more important thing here is that they all found out collectively, but especially Shedeur and by extension Deion, that, hey, man, we don't like what you guys are doing and the way that you talk and the way that you conduct yourselves. And the only thing, this is wild, this is my hot take for the weekend. The only thing that saved Shedeur Sanders from even more embarrassment than dropping all the way to the fifth round made him feel was those jackass frat boys, one of whom turned out to be the son of a defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons. The only thing that saved Shedeur from more embarrassment and more negative press and more negative publicity was that prank call. If anything, and I know they already talked, I know they already hashed it out, the Falcons arranged for this to happen.
The Falcons released a statement about it, too.
Shedeur and Deion should have, on the low, been thanking Jax Ulbrich and his idiot frat brothers for distracting the headlines. Because guess what? If that didn't happen, James, if that didn't become a bigger story, if that wasn't an even more acceptable level of conduct from people who should not have been abusing their access to phone numbers, if that had not become a story, what is the number one thing on the headline today? Or what are now it wouldn't be even a number one thing. It'd be like 1, 2, 3, 7. The thing that you would be seeing about Shedeur Sanders in the draft would be fifth round draft pick. And then what's the question after that? Why? Why was he a fifth round draft pick? And everybody has an answer. And the stories were starting to come out before this video went viral. They were trickling out. Well, one of the reasons I spoke with somebody in the NFL, this came from Rick Neuheisel, who's deep in the coaching community and is careful about burning bridges and doesn't want to tell these stories publicly. He knows Deion. He's going to see Deion on multiple occasions, and they're going to have a conversation about this. Rick Neuheisel told a story that was relayed to him from an NFL coach that Shedeur took a phone call during an interview with that coach. And instead of saying, "Hey, I'm in a meeting with a coach, I'll call you back," or just sending it to voicemail, which is what any normal human being does when they're interviewing for their life, for their job, for their livelihood. James, he answered the phone, according to the story, FaceTime, no less, held his phone and just left the person on the screen in the interview with the coach.
And I was going to say, you know Rick more than a lot of people because you spend a lot of time.
Yeah, we worked together. We did some Sirius XM stuff. Yeah.
So you saying that this is a guy who doesn't tell these kinds of stories very often, like that holds a lot of weight there because you know that there. So, but yeah, that's crazy. I have my phone on silent in meetings at a job I already work for, let alone on silent, and I'm not even looking to see if someone called me at a job interview. That's insane that he did that. And there's a lot of people that may not have heard these stories because, even though all of us watch the draft, sports fans watch the draft, we follow it, there's still things that fall through the cracks for all of us that don't work in it, right? There's people that didn't hear these stories, maybe didn't realize what kind of impact these things may have had on the actual guys who make the decisions on whether or not you're going to draft a guy, that still go, but it still doesn't make sense why he fell. And
look, it makes sense to everyone in the NFL because they were the ones who decided it was time for him to fall. It's not like, and by the way, the reports of collusion and the talking heads out there, some of whom are guys I really, really like. I want to get RG3 on the show. Robert Griffin III.
You got to make it happen, yeah.
Is one of the best analysts, I think. I think he's refreshing. He's got a different tone, a different style. He knows the game incredibly well.
Very well spoken, obviously.
He's awesome, dude. He's awesome. And he and Stephen A. Smith were kind of leading this charge like, this is racism. This is the NFL colluding against Shedeur. This is like the Kaepernick situation. And everyone else is like, what are you talking about, guys? There are too many counterpoints. There are so many counterpoints to that argument. I'm not even going to elucidate them on this show because it's just so ridiculous, right? But that's what happens when there's a figure like Shedeur who's that polarizing. And the only thing this weekend that stopped the flood of Shedeur hate and negativity and justification as to why this kid fell so far is that some idiots sitting on their phone in a frat who happen to be, I think it matters, rich white kids were prank calling him on what should be a special time for him and his family. That's even worse in a lot of people's mind, and I agree, than, being a little bit arrogant as a 22-year-old or a 21-year-old. That is mean. That is cruelty. That is, you're being a jerk for no reason. And they didn't just do it to Shedeur. They did it to other people. It's equally wrong no matter who you did it to. But the one, of course, that they wanted to put out there and that went viral, because both sides like for these things to be viral. The Sanders family loves all their stuff to be viral. And these kids obviously were doing it to go viral. Like that was – it's cruel. It's not cool at all. And just because you don't like somebody doesn't mean you should wish cruelty upon them. But I'm telling you, it all works out in a strange way to be a favor to Shedeur.
It really does.
Because Rick Neuheisel got that story, and then other insiders heard the story about the Brian Daboll, and Shedeur got into like a little miniature argument because what he likes to do is he likes to grill his quarterbacks. Daboll, the Giants coach, who was an option, apparently, right? Shedeur was an option for them. Okay, here's the package. Here's the play. What do you do? Shedeur wasn't prepared for that. Came in and didn't have like his dry erase marker ready. Wasn't ready to do it. And Coach Daboll apparently called him out on it. And then Shedeur didn't like to be called out, shockingly enough. A kid in that situation who doesn't get called out on stuff in his life didn't like being called out. Can you imagine going into an interview, and maybe he didn't want to play in New York, and so maybe he tanked that deliberately. But why wouldn't you want to play in New York if you are trying to be a celebrity and you're trying to brand things? Like, that's the place you would want to go. If you don't want to go to Cleveland where you ended up, go ahead and tank that interview. But we got like 2, 3, 4 of these stories, anecdotal things, all from separate sources and with separate teams having bad experiences with a guy who I could tell you, anecdotally, I've had bad experience. Like, he is not cool. He's not nice. He's arrogant. But would you not be if you were the best football player, one of the best football players in the country, the best football player in your community all growing up, son of a Hall of Famer, who also is kind of an arrogant guy? And I love Deion, but there's nobody, including Deion himself, will tell you that he's not cocky. Arrogant might be too strong, but he's not cocky at the very least, right? And the blind spot thing, I'll say it over and over again, it absolutely does exist. So now all that matters is that Shedeur Sanders makes the good decision for himself moving forward, maximizes his football potential. He's now in a quarterback room 5 guys deep. Deshaun Watson, mess of a situation. Don't talk to that guy. Don't let that guy mentor you. That is not a place you want to follow. Joe Flacco?
Sure.
Joe Flacco might take exception to the fact that Deion Sanders was like, Flacco's my age. He said that. Yeah. But Joe Flacco probably won't care. Like, Joe Flacco, you could tuck yourself under his wing and probably learn some things, right? They've got Kenny Pickett, old tiny hands, old little Burger King Whopper hands, Kenny Pickett. They got him.
I got these tiny hands.
And they got Dylan Gabriel, who they drafted ahead of Shedeur. So you can go into that quarterback room and you can equip yourself with the mentality of, like, I am going to do what needs to be done, show up early, leave late, that kind of a thing. And I'm going to earn the respect of these guys first and then the respect of my teammates at large. And I'm going to try to climb the ladder because talent-wise and arm ability, accuracy, diagnosis-wise, he's as good as any of those individuals with the exception of, well, he's probably not as good at football as Deshaun Watson, but Deshaun Watson is a mess otherwise. Joe Flacco is more accomplished, obviously, and a much more experienced veteran and probably could teach you a lot of things. But Kenny Pickett isn't special at the NFL level. Dylan Gabriel is a great quarterback, but he's on your level if you're Shedeur. That's the guy you could compete with and defeat. Are you going to make the choice and want to do that? This is the same decision that every single one of these players that were drafted or not drafted in the NFL world this weekend have to make. You got to make that decision. But the difference for Shedeur is you got to make that decision after the most humiliating thing we have seen in an NFL draft in a long time. This is 100 times worse than Aaron Rodgers' situation. This is brutal. And maybe it is the humble pie he needed. Maybe you're like RG3 and you don't think that he needed to be humbled at all. Maybe you think that his chip on the shoulder and his arrogant nature and the fact that he answers every single question with, let's be legendary, maybe you think that's a good thing. I think it's weird, gimmicky, dumb stuff. But I'm not an NFL GM or coach. I'm not an NFL teammate. I don't even know if Shedeur Sanders is going to try to make this work in Cleveland or if he's going to follow Scott Mitchell's advice and take a different path. We'll talk about that when Scott Mitchell joins us in about half an hour. I promise you that's pretty much all I got on Shedeur today. People have probably gotten a little exhausted on the thing, but I'm telling you, Jax Ulbrich, the son of the defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, who was the reason Shedeur Sanders got a prank phone call, he actually did that young man a favor because he became the even more hateable person this draft weekend. Sean O'Connell Show continues. We'll switch gears, talk a little hockey. Tom Callahan swings by, and we'll discuss the Stanley Cup playoffs. You got some really fascinating series going on. Utah's number one sports talk, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM, proud part of Utah's ESPN radio network.
Buchnevich gets it. Ahead for Sundqvist. He's got a trailer. Walking right to the top of the crease. Thomas scores! Robert Thomas pulled it to his backhand. 5-1 St. Louis.
And the fifth goal of the game for the Blues has chased Connor Hellebuck from Winnipeg's net for the second consecutive game.
Eric Comrie comes in. He played a little over 9 minutes in game 3 here. Faced only 3 shots, made 2 saves in the 7-2 loss to the Blues.
St. Louis faithful continues to serenade, saying, "We want Connor."
James Peterson pulled that highlight together from the from the Stanley Cup playoffs. Nick Olczyk on the call with John Ehlers, and man, 5th goal of the game for the St. Louis Blues, 5-1 win over Winnipeg, and strange goalie situations. The likely Vezina winner, Connor Hellebuck, is pulled for a second consecutive game, as you heard in the call there, on just like abysmal nights. The Vezina, by the way, goes to the best goaltender in the NHL, for those of you who have not been paying attention to NHL hockey all that long. Tom Callahan, our next guest, has, and this is wild, but maybe Tom has an answer. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me on.
11 goals in the past 2 games given up by the likely Vezina winner. What is happening here?
Well, I think people forget that St. Louis ended with the best record down the stretch and since 4 Nations in the league. The Blues were awesome down the stretch, and this is not a coincidence that they're playing well against Winnipeg. I actually put Winnipeg on upset watch before this whole thing started, just because, well, 2 reasons. Number one, there's always that quote-unquote hangover for a President's Cup or a President's Trophy winner best team in the regular season. For whatever reason, there seems to be a little bit of a curse around that, and those teams struggle when they get in the playoffs sometimes. But, I thought about it. And St. Louis plays the kind of game that can put the Jets off of theirs. The Jets are deep. They have scoring everywhere. And they're a well-rounded team with, and I would still argue, the best goaltender in the game. St. Louis has the hottest goaltender in the game, but the Blues have always been awesome because they play a physical style. They lean on teams. They can get under your skin. And when they're working together, it's very effective. So I don't think it's a huge surprise. This series could go for a very long time. And in fact, all the series in the West are really good right now.
Colorado, Dallas, 2-2 right now. Minnesota, Vegas, 2-2 right now. Edmonton, LA, 2-2 right now. Which of those, aside from the one we just talked about, do you think is most interesting?
I can't wait to see. Well, I've been enjoying the Kings-Oilers. This is the fourth year in a row they've met in the playoffs. You want to talk about just absolutely hating one another? 4 times in a row, they're just sick of each other, and it shows, and it's great. It's fun, right? It's enjoyable to watch. I think that, a lot of folks don't necessarily realize that playoff series build rivalries, I think, more than anything that happens in a regular season game. And so you don't necessarily put Edmonton, LA in the same sentence until you get to the postseason, and then it's just a crazy series because there's so much pressure on Edmonton, and the Kings are sick of losing to them. So that one's been a lot of fun to watch. And then I'm genuinely surprised by what Minnesota's doing. I'm not going to lie. I am very surprised that Minnesota is hanging around as much as they are in this series against Vegas.
I don't think we haven't talked to you since Florida and Tampa started their series off, and you get a Tkachuk back, and he has a 3-point night off the injury, and it's like, oh, okay, this might bode well for your Stanley Cup playoff run. How significant can Matthew Tkachuk in his return be through the life of these playoffs?
Well, he's huge because he's the guy you love to have on your team, and you absolutely hate if he's on the other team. And those guys, they don't grow on trees, but they're so valuable. It's great to see. That is the only series, in my opinion, right now worth watching in the East, just because I think the other ones are, for the most part, over. But yeah, that and Florida Tampa Bay is great because there is already a built-in rivalry there between those two teams. So, you have that, and then you have on top of that, you've got those two teams just kind of really going at it with, the chippy play, the physical, hitting, and the teams that just don't like each other are so much fun to watch because they don't like each other. And that's one of the things that Tampa and Florida have. That's another one where you don't probably put that on your top rivals in the NHL until you think about it. You're like, wow, Tampa Bay's won a couple of Stanley Cups lately. Florida won it last year. And you know what? Those two teams are really good. And of course they're going to hate one another and work really hard to beat one another. And boy, it's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, they're
honestly, that's been a blast.
Both really good and 3-4 hours away from one another on the freeway. So really, that's a fun one. We do this thing in sports media where we all lean into the same cliches, especially when it's sports that we're not full on insiders. Stanley Cup playoffs they're just different. They're the best. And it's true. You could tune in without being a hardcore hockey fan, and you can see the intensity. But for folks who are, new to the NHL world, because we finally have a team here in Salt Lake City, and so even though we're not in the playoffs, they're finally tuning in to the Stanley Cup playoffs with some more vested interest. What are the things they should be looking for, in your opinion, that show you the difference between playoff hockey and regular season hockey, or playoff NHL hockey and the NBA playoffs that we're so used to watching?
Well, I will say this. In the playoffs, one of the hallmarks of it is just guys playing through injuries that would normally sideline them for a while. You'll see a guy, have an arm removed, and he'll be back with a prosthetic arm in 3 minutes. It's kind of crazy to see what players are willing to play through. Playoff hockey, though, where it manifests itself, as far as the toughness, the ethos of being tough in the playoffs, shot blocking, the being willing to give up your body to take a hit, make a hit, block a shot, do whatever you have to do, that is really playoff hockey in a nutshell. It's a tougher brand, but it's still skilled, and it's a lot of fun to watch. The other thing you will notice probably if you're new is just how much teams depend on one another, like within a rivalry, to really kind of drive the intensity and the hatred, which is, I mean, I use hatred in the sports sense of the word, right, for the most part. They just, by the time they played game 3 or game 4, even if they didn't know each other in game 1, it is so intense. There's constant yapping. There's always extra after the whistle. And that's where you see the manifestation of that intensity. It really is. It's probably the most physical thing you're going to see.
Tom Callahan is our guest here on the Sean O'Connell Show, Utah Hockey Club insider, who's going to be our NHL playoffs insider. He's going to join us every week throughout the course of these NHL playoffs, and we'll check in on the way things are going in the hunt for Lord Stanley's Cup. All right, so let's put a Utah Hockey Club lens on these playoffs. When you look at it and you see who's excelling right now, you see maybe some of the teams that are struggling. How far away is Utah Hockey Club, or what's the best club to look at and say, if they can do it, Utah Hockey Club can do it in these next 2 or 3 years?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because, like I say, there's one series I like in the East, and then I like all 4 in the West. And Utah being in the West, that tells you, in my opinion, that the bar is much higher in the West.
Yeah.
You have to be much better in the West to be able to make the playoffs and then get in and make a run. The good news is, what we're seeing in the West is anybody who does get in has a chance. And I think St. Louis is a great example of that because, in a way, Utah, at least the way they talk about building their team, and Bill Armstrong talks about building his team, is a lot in that mold of being big, physical, tough, hard to play against, even in the regular season. But if you want to see how that could manifest itself, if some of these bigger, stronger players who are prospects right now start to come to fruition here, Utah hasn't grown into itself yet as far as the physical play. They're not there yet. They weren't there this year. That's okay. They took some steps forward. But I think that the mold they're trying to follow is very much like a St. Louis Blues. And like I say, when that team is on and they're effective and they come together, plus right now they have arguably the hottest goaltender in the league, which Veg has shown he can be. That is what your roadmap may look like if you're Utah. I mean, you got skill, you got guys who can put the puck in the net, but now you need to finish developing the guys who could put the other guys through the net. And that's really what they need to do to move forward here and break this really, really tough ceiling to break into those playoffs.
We already talked about Tkachuk for Florida, but you've got, I mean, some like really, truly elite players scattered throughout these Stanley Cup playoffs. You got, the McKinnons and the McDavids of the world. Who is, in your mind, the number one appointment viewing, can't miss it, I at least have to catch the highlights if I'm on an airplane or something? Who's the guy, if there is one, that you just have to watch in this 2025 Stanley Cup playoff?
Wow. One? That's tough.
You can give me more than one, but the ones that really draw you in.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think that conversation always starts and ends with Connor McDavid. He's a human highlight reel. He can go around 5 guys. So you do have to watch the Oilers-Kings highlights. And that series is great to begin with. But, my goodness, he's so good, so talented. He makes an impact in every game he plays, one way or another. And so I think you have to watch him. Absolutely. I'm trying to think maybe, and we talk about Tkachuk in the East. I mean, you have to watch him because you never know when he's going to punch you in the back of the head. So you kind of you got to keep your head on a swivel. He's an interesting guy for me. I love watching him. That's a lot of fun. You know who I'm watching, and I haven't yet seen him take over, but I want him to. I am watching and waiting Austin Matthews for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think there's still a lot of fanfare around Ovi and the Capitals. They're going to get by the Canadians. But Austin Matthews with the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a lot of depth on Toronto, but Matthews needs to take over and make it his team right now if they're going anywhere. So I would watch the McDavid highlights, but I would check the Austin Matthews stat line.
When you look at Matthews, I saw something, I think it was last week. The only player active right now in the NHL who is like even in the conversation as someone who could be near the goals total that, of course, we saw Ovi break the record this year. It's Austin Matthews. If he has the longevity that Ovechkin has had, their goal scoring pace has been pretty similar to a certain point to this point in Matthews' career. Does his game have the longevity that Ovechkin's does?
Ovechkin has been remarkably injury-free throughout most of his career. So he has been very blessed, very fortunate, however you want to say it. He's just happened to have that work out for him. I don't see why Austin Matthews couldn't. And there's times they actually try to get Ovechkin to dial down how physical he would play when he got mad. He would try to go run guys over, and sometimes to great effect. That's just who he is. But he's also a very solidly built human being. If I'm looking at Austin Matthews, doesn't play as physical, as an Ovechkin, I think can definitely have the longevity. And boy, wouldn't it be a treat to someday have an American-born player be the all-time goal-scoring leader in the National Hockey League? I think that would be absolutely amazing.
Before I let you go, what is the biggest thing on your mind from a Utah Hockey Club perspective right now? What's the next question you need to see answered or the next personnel decision you need to see made?
Okay, I do. I just want to put in a quick plug for everybody to watch the men's IIHF World Championships that starts May 5th. So you got time to get that on your calendar. There are 4 Utah hockey clubbers going there. For me, I think Utah needs to, through free agency in the draft here, and of course who they do and do not bring back, really determine what course they want to follow as a team. There were times early in the season I didn't know if they had their identity yet. I still think if I ask someone else around the league, who is the Utah Hockey Club, what game do they play, I don't know that they have an answer. And I think that that's the most important thing is whatever players you do bring in, whoever you let go, now I need an answer to what kind of hockey team is this going to be. I've heard Bill Armstrong say it. I've heard Andre Tourney say it. Now I need it on the ice that I can visibly watch a game and say, oh, that is their identity.
This is probably a naive question for someone who's NHL neophyte compared to you, but like, are most teams what they say they are when they have enough time to kind of build that together? Because everyone in the basketball world wants to say they're a certain way, and only like 4 teams are. Everyone in football is just like, we're tough, physical, nasty, which I think is probably what the NHL is going for as well. But there's really like 8 teams that can punch you in the mouth effectively, for real. I come from the combat sports world. Everyone says there's something, and not everybody is that. Is it generally, I don't know, is it something that NHL teams actually are good at doing, setting a plan and then building a roster and an identity and a play style that fits that plan?
Honestly, it really depends on your player acquisitions, your drafting, and sometimes getting a little lucky with a player who might land in your lap. There are teams that are who they say they are because they have the right players to be that team. If you have Connor McDavid on your team, that kind of would change your focus and your identity. You're going to build around, the best player in the world. And if you're Florida and you say, hey, we're going to be angry and speaking a punch of people in the mouth, that's what we're going to do, and it brings them success, yes, they have the roster put together to do that. But there's only so much talent to go around, and there are only so many players who can fit the mold that you're looking for, and, there's 32 teams. So I would say that by the time we get to the last 8 teams standing, and again, the West is much more difficult, I think, to advance in than the East, but you'll see the teams that play into their identity and really live up to it. Every team has a blueprint. Every team has a plan. They just can't always get the personnel to fit that plan.
Makes sense. Easier said than done, as often things are in life. Tom, always appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me on.
Tom Callahan, Utah Hockey Club insider and our NHL playoffs insider, as long as we're looking for who gets that Stanley Cup. The West, by the way, the Western Conference, you got all these series tied up. You got it's interesting because in the playoffs, guys are a little bit more mindful about fighting and about taking the 5-minute major penalty and what that can do to their team. But it's weird, like that you might see fewer fights in the playoffs, even though the game is more physical. So it kind of like the amount of violence you're going to see balances out. It's just like actual hockey violence instead of hockey fights. So great, though.
Speaking of fights, though, did you see Tom Wilson and I forget the first name, Anderson from the Canadiens? Did you see their fight that spilled into the bench?
Yes.
At the end of the period.
By the way,
amazing.
Fighting on the bench, in the bench, however you want to say that, because of the way the hockey benches are set up, you have to be an absolute lunatic to be like, you know what? It doesn't bother me that I am now going to be surrounded by like 12 guys that are within striking distance of me that see me going at their teammate, and I'm going to keep fighting. You have to be a crazy person.
Now the benches were empty because it was end of the period, so you didn't.
Yeah, but they filled up.
But yeah.
The guys were right. Like everyone was, and
Just
the other guys. Maybe it's like an unwritten rule I don't know in hockey where you don't like go 2 and 3 on 1, but everyone was like holding everyone else back. It was wild, man.
And then the fake crying from Wilson as he gets up, like it's so good. Here's the craziest thing to me, OC, as a guy who's a lifelong basketball fan, and basketball is my favorite sport. You get into a shoving match in basketball, you might get suspended, right? Even in a playoff game. That happens. Their punishment from the league, $500,000 or $5,000 fine.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the economics are different. So $5,000 is definitely a lot more significant than $5,000 to an NBA player. But still, like,
yeah, I mean, they're still millionaires.
Like, what do you have to do to get thrown out of a hockey game and get suspended from a hockey game? I'm not sure there's anything. I mean, it certainly happens, but so I'm exaggerating. But if that is only a $5,000 fine, truly almost anything goes in hockey. It's amazing.
Way, if you want to know, like, just go Google when you have some time today. Google Tom Wilson, and Tom Wilson looks like the guy that was cast to be the high school bully in like every 1990s movie.
He definitely does.
He's like a square jawed,
just with
like,
a beard. I mean, actually,
like,
some of those guys have beards too.
Like kind of handsome, but like also sort of dumb looking. You know what I mean? Like he is exactly that guy that you cast, and probably fits the mold because he's a bit of a goon sometimes in hockey. Very physical player, great player, and had a huge legal hit in this series that totally shifted things in Game 4. So, anyway, big thanks to Tom Callahan. Utah Hockey Club has really got us revved up on the ice here. Okay, NBA playoffs are happening right now, and unfortunately, one of our favorite guys with a local connection appears that he will be out for the foreseeable future. Let's hope it's not forever. We'll talk about that next in the Hot Lunch. Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Hot lunch real quick here to close out hour number 1. Scott Mitchell is going to join us in hour number 2, talk about all things football. We'll also check in with Devin Jackson as the NFL draft is now in the rearview mirror. The Shedeur Sanders saga, the soap opera, has a lot of attention. And Scott actually had it's the best idea I have heard around Shedeur Sanders and how he should handle this situation from anyone, anywhere in the media. He said it on the Down and Dirty early this morning. If you weren't listening to that, we'll bring it back on my show here in about 5 minutes. Bad news coming out of the NBA playoffs as it appears that Damian Lillard is he's going to be sidelined for the foreseeable future and hopefully not beyond that. A lot of folks thinking that this MRI, which is scheduled right now, basically, is going to reveal that he has a torn Achilles in his left leg.
Just gutting for basketball fans. I think it's gutting in particular for basketball fans around here because, as Spence Checketts likes to say on the drive, we all think he's ours because he played at Weber State and was awesome at Weber State. And
by the way, he returns. He comes back every now and again.
He loves Utah. He never misses a chance to express his affection for Utah and Ogden, where he played ball in particular. So we think he's ours. We think that basketball fans around here would rank them as their favorite Jazz player of all time, one of their favorite Jazz players of all time, even though he never played for the Jazz, right? Like that's the way that we feel about Damian Lillard around here. So it sucks for us here in Utah. In Portland, they're probably feeling a lot. It's probably super gutting because of his career with the Blazers, obviously in Milwaukee. Like this is one of the best guys. Like you talked about NFL decision makers having way too big of a blind spot for guys who have done absolutely heinous things off the field, criminal things off the field, allegedly, or whether there's a ton of evidence that they have. Damian Lillard is so far removed from that kind of guy. Yeah. You just want him to win, and this just sucks that he may have an Achilles tear, certainly an Achilles injury that's going to probably keep him out of the rest of the playoffs. I just hope that it's not an Achilles tear that's going to keep him out, and maybe keep him out for all of next season, maybe even end his career. That would be terrible.
So the thing about Achilles tears, they are not what they used to be like this I think even in the 90s, if there's an orthopedic surgeon out there listening, I think in the 90s this was like a career-ending injury.
Yeah, I would say even into the first decade of the 2000s there, it wasn't really until Kobe returned in 2014 that we realized that a guy could return. Now, he wasn't anywhere. He was a shell of himself when he returned, but he still returned and played a few more years.
There's this magical substance out there that I don't offhand. I know you're not supposed to use it in the NBA, but you can use it when you're rehabbing from an injury, and they're going to conveniently not test you in all these leagues. Like HGH is a miracle drug for injuries. I've seen it. I've seen people take it, fight injuries that were surgically repaired, that somebody would fix it, would take, and that was like the bootleg Chinese stuff that came in the box with no English label on it, and you had to like watch the YouTube to even know how to administer it. Like these guys were poor and taking the bootleg stuff and hoping that it was exactly what it said it was, and it works. It's like a miracle drug. So somebody of his status with his level of access to elite care, I think, if you have to repair this and then you can do it, you can take what you need to take. Terrell Suggs came back from this injury, right? And he's putting a lot more force on his Achilles even than a basketball player is. Ray Lewis came back in like 6 months from a torn bicep tendon. That used to be a huge thing. In any case, you hope if Damian Lillard gets the care he needs quickly that it's not a career-ending injury. It's not something that alters his long-term future in the NBA. If he's 34, which is old for an NBA player, it's young for a human being. And he is one of those guys. One of the reasons I have such admiration for him and have been such a fan of his. He's one of those guys that since his before the draft process, he has gotten himself involved deeply in his endorsements and his investments and that kind of thing. Like Damian Lillard designed the Damian Lillard shoe. It wasn't like, hey, mock up a bunch of things and I'll choose which one I like best. Damian Lillard went to Adidas and wanted to be involved in the process. He's a very curious, thoughtful individual
and a talented one besides basketball. Like he's
a great rapper. He's
great rapper.
He's a rapper. He's got.
You probably heard he's dabbled with boxing and is
he's a huge boxing fan.
Yeah,
he'll probably when it's all said and done, he'll probably be one of those guys that you see on boxing broadcasts and people are like, wait, who's that? Like Rosie Perez is on boxing broadcasts sometimes and people are like, why is she? They're just huge boxing fans with a lot of knowledge of it. But you hope that Damian Lillard is back and that a window stays open because he hasn't been able to compete for a championship yet. He hasn't even been in mega meaningful playoff series on a regular basis.
Yeah, one conference finals was swept from it. So just you hope he can come back. And the only reason, because your point about guys are able to come back in just about every sport from Achilles injuries now and continue their career. The only reason I think it might end up being a career ender is because he's in his mid-30s. If he was 30 right now, I'd be like, oh yeah, he'll be back. But you just don't know because that's old anyway for an NBA player, as you said.
Anyway, well wishes to Damian Lillard for the hot lunch. Reminder to all of you out there that we've got our Festival of Teas going on, powered by the Utah Golf Association. We are giving away more golf today because we do it every single day on the Down and Dirty, on the Drive with Spence Checketts, and, of course, right here on the Sean O'Connell Show. 18 holes to Nibley Park. We'll give those away during Topical Trivia in an hour and 40 minutes. Scott Mitchell joins us next to start off hour number 2. Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Welcome back to the Sean O'Connell Show on ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM. Scott Mitchell is kind enough to join us, the host of the Down and Dirty here on ESPN 700 from 10 to 11, immediately preceding our show. Lucky enough to have him in studio with me today. It's a special occasion at ESPN 700, a little pizza party happening. And unfortunately, Scott, you got your pizza just in time to come in here and sit and talk to me and stare at that delicious pizza.
Well, it gives me motivation. And I had a couple of bites. So,
Okay.
and there's an aroma to it that I vicariously can live through my pizza here for a few minutes. I'm a big fan of delayed gratification. It will taste better because I've had to wait.
I was trying to display and demonstrate and explain the delay of gratification principle to my 5-year-old this weekend.
That doesn't work.
And she was like, the what?
Yeah. No.
The gratify. And I was like, never mind.
Well, Shadur Sanders, he understands that principle quite well.
Okay, so I didn't want to spend my whole show on the Shadur Sanders soap opera today.
Why not?
But it's really one of the more interesting things we've seen happen in the NFL draft. I mean, I guess since the 2004 draft, we haven't seen a fall like this. But
yeah.
2005 draft, sorry. The really fascinating thing for me was the divide in how many people were like, yeah, well, this is kind of what happens. And then the people who are just like, this is an outrage, this is an injustice,
right.
This is collusion, this is something that is completely unacceptable, and I won't stand for it. I mean, Mel Kiper was losing his ever-loving mind on set. He was yelling. Reese Davis was having to be like, no, we understand, Mel, stop.
Right.
It was wild.
Yeah.
And, of course, then you have, like, the other typical things that happen in a situation like this one. But you've been a lot closer to these decisions and a lot closer to these conversations than any of us have. And look, they just decided, everyone in the NFL just decided that, like, this guy's film is not adequate. Why did it happen the way it happened?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, but one of them, and it's a weird thing that happens in the NFL, especially when you get out of the early rounds. So you get out of round 1 and round 2, then it's really more about need, not so much about where you have the players ranked. They have a bucket of quarterbacks kind of rated in the same area, and all of a sudden, if a team makes a move on a guy, you get nervous because you go, we want to draft a quarterback. We just don't know when. And so all of a sudden you just start getting runs on whatever it was. And the player that was deep in this draft, there's 2 running backs and defensive tackles. And so teams go, well, we're going to get a defensive tackle. We better get it now. Let's not wait around. Because you're splitting hairs with talent levels at a certain point. I mean, if you're going to draft a guy, you're saying that guy can play in the NFL. Like we believe now at what level, at what time, we don't know, but that player is a player that can actually make it in this league. And it's not, this collusion thing is an absolute farce. Talent is really what drives everything. But in the later rounds, it can be a crapshoot. You can see a lot of crazy things go on. Now, if you're Shadur, I know teams don't want this. They don't want a circus. They don't want an entourage. They don't want a guy who's more about, my social media influence, my outside influence outside of sports. So they don't want to. They go, if he was uber talented, we don't care. We'll put up with. You bring your circus to town, we'll put the tent up, right? If you're talented, if you're that uber, if you're Cam Ward, we'll allow a circus. But if you're not, it's like why? We don't need to do this, and so they won't, and they don't, and they don't care about Dion or anything. Dion was a circus, like in my era when Prime was playing, he was so over the top, so obnoxious, so outlandish, but he had freaking amazing talent, and everyone was like, yeah, Prime time, sure, we'll have you come to, like, they don't care because he can play. And I'm not sure Shadur, I'm not sure he can play.
It's not unique to Shedeur, by the way. If you remember, you go back far enough, Kayvon Thibodeau was a guy that was talked about coming out of Oregon. There were times where he was like, hey, he's going to be the number one pick in the draft. Yeah. And one of the concerns was he had done all this meeting with Nike and all these like business internships and stuff.
And spoken to third person.
And there were teams that were just like, the part of that conversation was he's more interested in business and in his branding and in the life after football than he is in football.
Right.
Now, he didn't fall to the 5th round.
Yeah.
But it's not like people only do this to Shedeur. There's been examples of it in the past. You on the Down and Dirty this morning, I was listening, and you brought up, I thought, it's the best idea I've heard as an alternative, as a solution, as a however you want to put it for Shedeur Sanders, because this whole thing has been humiliating for him. I'm not his biggest fan. I'm a huge fan of Deion. I'm not a big fan of either of his kids, but like your idea that, hey, like, don't just go be quarterback number 5 in a 5-quarterback room in Cleveland. Don't sign that deal because he doesn't have to. Go play somewhere else, which, of course, in basketball you can do. In football now there's a spring league. That's a real alternative. Go play somewhere else, put out more film, conduct yourself. It would be a great thing for any spring league team, any UFL team. The Rock would get involved, obviously, as the president of that league. I mean, this is a great idea, and you think, you brought it up on your show, you think it's something he could potentially do.
If you listen to the draft, if you know anything, and I concur with this 1,000%, it's not when you go, it's where you go. And going to the right situation is everything. Zach Wilson, had he not gone to the Jets, maybe he's in a different situation, right? Who knows? But I do know that where you go, and you have no leverage. And a lot of people are like, how dare Deion just say, hey, we're not going to that team, we're not going to this team. And I'm like, yeah, I might say the same thing to my son. Like, where you end up is so critical. And being one of 5 guys in Cleveland is not the most ideal situation. Now, you could argue, Kenny Pickett's kind of established, maybe he's a journeyman guy. Joe Flacco's at the end of his rope. Deshaun's out the door. And all I got to do is battle Dylan Gabriel, and I think I'm better than him. So it might not be a bad situation, but on the outside, it's hard to get reps. It's hard to get any traction. And if you really wanted to and if you really believe in yourself, Shedeur says, man, I'm the guy, and you won't regret drafting me. You won't do all this stuff. Then put your money where your mouth is. One of the best things that ever happened to me in my career was going and playing in the World League after my second year in the NFL. It was huge for me, and getting game experience and really growing as a player. I'm surprised that the spring league, and maybe there's a connection to the NFL that they kind of maybe they work hand in hand with each other, so they may not tamper with players. But if you're a spring league, you need talent, and the only way you're going to get talent is get kids out of high school or get kids potentially out of the draft, and that would make your team so much more intriguing. And the reality is the NFL would be better with it. I think the NFL would be better to see more time with Shedeur and get a better evaluation on where he is, because at this point he may be the hungriest guy in the world and he's ready to run through a brick wall and say, all right, I'm going to prove you all wrong. And that's all people want to see and want to say. I think Shedeur knew this, though, and I think he knew it because Deion was like, well, I'll be happy. Deion changed his tune. Shedeur changed his tune. And he talked about, how, you won't regret drafting me. You won't, so I think he knew because his tune went from I'm the guy and, I'm going to be 1 or 2 in the draft to, I'll, wherever I get drafted, I'm going to make it happen. And I think he knew.
Well, there was some. I thought it was a great decision. I didn't know the motivation for the decision, but he wasn't going to attend the actual draft, and thank goodness, or he'd have been sitting in that green room for 3 days.
That would have been painful.
Oh, and look, it was painful enough as it is. Like, but really, really fascinating the way this whole thing worked out. The other thing, I started the show with this today. This was a bad draft for Utah. It was University of Utah. Yeah. For BYU, Utah State had 1 guy go. Jalen Rose, great player, 4th rounder, awesome for them. but like there were 2 in-state guys selected in the draft, and one of them's a basketball player.
Hardly played. No, I've actually had Caleb on my show, and watching him this last year is like way underutilized. I'm like, this kid is a talent. Get him out on the field. Just throw the ball. Like, there's nothing greater as a quarterback to know that if I throw the ball in the right location, this guy's always going to be open. And he always could create mismatches. But the thing about Caleb that I really liked is that he can run. Like he being a basketball guy, you kind of run. And for a bigger guy to be able to get down the field and run and is really nice catching the football. He wanted to go to Denver. He spent a lot of time talking to the folks there before the draft. And you talk about a perfect scenario for him. If there's a coach that, if he's got a talent and he's got ability, Sean Payton's a guy that will figure it out. I mean, he's a guy that may end up playing 12 to 15 years in the NFL just because of the body that he has.
So I also put way too many polls out. Now that I look at it, I've oversaturated the Twitter polls today.
Uh-oh.
But this one I do want your answer on, because there were a bunch of guys, a bunch of Utes that signed undrafted free agent contracts. And so I asked this question. These are the 4 most likely for me. So I only took what I consider the top of the top and then asked the question to the people. Which Utah football undrafted free agent is most likely to make an active roster in the NFL this year? Zamiah Vaughn, Karene Reed, Junior Tafuna, Mekhi Bernard. If you could pick one of those 4.
Connor O'Toole.
You think Connor O'Toole's more likely to be on an active roster?
I'll probably say probably Junior, either Junior or Zamiah.
Okay.
I think it.
Junior, by the way, I was surprised that Junior did not get drafted. Yeah. Like, if Karene Reed doesn't get drafted, I think he's an awesome player. But I'm like, okay. Like, he's not the ideal size. He doesn't have the ideal measurables. Junior Tafuna had some injury issues, and his production was inconsistent at times. But he's like an ideal body.
Well, his challenge was there were so many defensive tackles in the draft. You get lost in the shuffle. But I definitely talented. I've always been a big fan of Zamiah Vaughn, and you've just seen him progress and get better and better every year. Maybe I'm going to go with Zamiah. I'm going to change my tune.
But you also said Connor O'Toole.
Well, he wasn't on your list, so I had to go off of your list.
I deliberately put him off my list because I like Connor O'Toole, the athlete. Connor O'Toole, the football player, we never got to see enough.
No.
The injuries became too much of an issue. Like I don't know. I mean, Connor O'Toole is a guy who you heard his name far more often in the offseason discussions than you did on game day when it's you and Bill calling the game.
I was more disappointed with Connor O'Toole not playing than really at the point with Cam Rising, because I thought he was really talented. I thought he was disruptive. I thought he was a guy that could really get to the quarterback. I thought he was a guy that would have changed a lot for the defense, but he couldn't stay healthy. And I don't know why, whatever, but it was just mind-numbing to me to watch the injuries because I believe there was the talent there to do something special.
It is one of the downsides of when you ask somebody who's got a tall frame, be like, hey, add like 40 pounds of muscle.
Right.
If your body is naturally inclined to be like 210 pounds and you bulk up to 250 pounds, sometimes that puts excess load on your tendons and things like that. And it's a challenge that you have when guys fluctuate a lot in size, as I'm sure you're aware. But I think that could have been part of it with Connor.
And for me, I just go past the 50 pounds. Once you get to a certain weight, it doesn't bother you anymore. I don't get injured anymore, Sean. I'm completely healthy.
Hey, I will say this. I don't know if there's been studies done on it, but guys that are built like me and built like the prime Scott Mitchell, where you're not ripped, even when you're in shape, you're not shredded.
Right.
You don't get hurt as often.
Yeah.
Like my MMA coach, all right, he has Jeremy Horn, fought in the UFC, fought Chuck Liddell for a UFC championship. He's got the body of a plumber. He doesn't mind me saying that.
Right.
The man never, in 100-plus pro fights, never had a significant injury. There's something to it. When you look at, like, there are certain guys out there where you're just like, that's not a pro athlete's body. And they somehow, there's the excess fat or something makes you more durable. I don't know what it is.
I'm going with the plumber look. I like it. That's my new mantra. Plumber body for life.
When people are like, why did you not try to get in shape and actually look good while you were fighting? Be like, it was an injury prevention thing.
Yeah.
I was better. I knew if I was chubby, I was less likely to get hurt.
I live by that mantra. Yes, chubby is in. Chubby plumber.
So is there any team in particular whose draft you really liked, or one particular pick that you were like, that's a team that knows what it's doing?
Well, everyone felt this is weird because I'm going to say the Cleveland Browns, and because they got all those draft picks back that they lost with Deshaun Watson, so they really haven't lost a lot, from that draft. They got Abdul Carter, or no, they got Mason, the defensive tackle, Mason Graham, and if Shedeur pans out and he is like some people think he is, I don't know if he is or isn't. His game just has to speed up so much. That's the biggest. And it has to, because when you're a guy that doesn't have a strong arm, you gotta anticipate the heck out of things, and that's just where he doesn't do it. And he is accurate, but it's just accurate's fine, but if it's late and if it's not in the right time, it doesn't mean anything. But if he does pan out, Cleveland getting the draft picks, getting a good player, and if Shedeur pans out, could actually do well in the draft. And for some reason, I just think Cleveland did all right. Now it'll be a cluster with all of the quarterbacks they have, but
novel concept for Cleveland to draft right.
Right. Yeah.
They have, though, and Myles Garrett has worked out nicely for them.
They've developed a really good defense over. They've just missed. And look, they took a swing with Deshaun Watson, who I thought was a really good player. He just unfortunately has just been injured or suspended, and it's been a tough thing.
Yeah, look, when Deshaun Watson was a Clemson football player, I was like, this kid is he should be the Heisman Trophy winner. He was unbelievable. Yep. We had no idea about his strange proclivities or anything at that time. But that version of Deshaun Watson, I was like, this guy can do a lot for a football team.
Yeah. Yeah, I was excited to see what he actually could do. So, I like Cleveland in the draft. You look at some of these teams, like I look at the Washington Commanders, where they have a quarterback that they're going to ride for the next 3 or 4 years on a rookie contract. They're a team that will be able to do a lot. I think Caleb Williams, and he might have the right coach with him. Some of the moves that they've made, not completely with the draft, but getting him another weapon offensively. You could see the Bears make a move, and you see where if a team does it right in a draft or doesn't address it in the draft. In the Super Bowl was a great example. You have the Eagles, who did a good job in the draft, and it turned their whole defense around, their whole system around, and then the Kansas City didn't. They didn't address the offensive line issues, and it was a real problem for them ultimately in the end. Another team that has done a good job of drafting recently was the Detroit Lions, and it really turned their fortunes around. So you can, with just a couple of right players, really make big moves and have significant impacts on your season, on your team relatively quick. That's the exciting part about football, and that's part of the parity of all of it. The balance of winning and losing is just so narrow and so close, and you just pick it right with a player or two can just change everything.
The pizza, my mouth is watering at this point. It still smells so good. Hopefully there's still a little residual warmth involved in the pizza party.
Well, I'll blow on your pizza there if you want me to warm it up for you.
No, that's okay. Thanks. I don't want you to
full of hot air here.
I don't want you to spit on it on purpose or something. So you can claim it. Scott Mitchell, thanks for joining me on the show as always.
You got it. All right, delayed gratification. I can eat my pizza.
We're going to eat our pizza. Hopefully you get some pizza as well. Scott Mitchell and his conversation brought to you today by Mountain Land Supply, mountainlandsupply.com, or any of their physical locations for all your home improvement projects. Devin Jackson to talk about, you guessed it, the NFL Draft over the weekend. It's the Sean O'Connell Show on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.
With the 241st pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Caleb Lawner, tight end, Utah.
Who announced that pick, James? Caleb Lawner, draft announcement, day 3 of the draft, pick 241 from the NFL Network. Caleb, they called him Lawner, we'll call him Loner. Caleb Lawner, a former basketball star turned now NFL tight end. Wow. Crazy. Devin Jackson joins us again. He's been a huge asset for us as the draft approached, and now a little post-mortem that the draft and all 3 rounds are done. Devin Jackson, kind enough to join us one more time. Devin, how are you?
Doing great, Sean. We're finally over with the NFL draft, and it's come and gone and went by so quickly. But now, kind of put it in the rearview mirror, and teams are getting ready to do rookie minicamp and getting ready for this upcoming NFL season. So looking forward to now kind of seeing where everyone is landed and see all the different fits that, you can take a look at and kind of evaluate it from there.
For you, is it a relief that the draft is in the rear view, or is it like this melancholy that you had that big time thing that you were so focused on and doing so much work on, and now that's over, at least for 2025?
I would say still in the relief stage. I mean, there will be that part is like, wow, I miss it, and all that work that you put in, and just what goes by so quickly. You spend months and months, preparing for it, and then it actually happens, and you're just watching all the picks fly off, especially on that last day of the draft where, the tempo is much quicker. But yeah, I would say relief for now. You put a lot of work into it, and you kind of see it all come to fruition. Some of the guys that you like through the process, and some of the guys that you're just kind of rooting for, end up in their different spots. And other guys that may not get drafted still getting those free agent deals. So, it's I think just generally a positive time right now. Everyone feels pretty positive and upbeat about, the draft this time of year. So it'll be interesting to see how kind of that mood changes over the next few months.
All right, Devin, let's get this part of the conversation out of the way. The Shedeur Sanders 5th round slide. I didn't know if he'd be a first-round pick. There was no part of me that thought it would go this long, this late, and there would be quite this much drama involved in it. Your reaction to what was the number one storyline, really, of this NFL draft?
Yeah, it just kind of really unfolded from there. You knew that he probably wasn't going to go top 10, top 15 was going to be a stretch even then, but you thought top 20 and maybe sometime in the first round seemed reasonable, but, last into the 5th round, watching some of the other quarterbacks go off the board that I think general consensus can agree that, weren't better than him currently and probably weren't going to be better than him, once they got into the NFL. So, yeah, it was just crazy to watch in real time. You hear from family and friends that are even puzzled. I mean, people that are very closely connected, to the NFL draft and have NFL sources we're all surprised. So I think just in general, the surprise and just unexpected nature of that just made it for, such a compelling story to watch and, a reason for people to continue to tune in. But yeah, I could not have seen I could have seen the draft go many different ways, but him ending up in the 5th round just never really crossed my mind, and still kind of hard to fathom, a few days later.
And look, he ended up going to a team that already drafted a quarterback a couple rounds ahead of him. So how much does that change the dynamic in Cleveland in your mind?
Yeah, I think it certainly, I feel like, lowers the expectations for Shedeur, even though, there's going to be a lot of media attention, just because of how high profile he is and how long he had to wait to hear his name called. But, I think it kind of gives him an opportunity to just go in and, anything that he does at this point is kind of a bonus. You're really not expecting much out of the 5th round pick. And the NFL kind of made it clear, maybe they don't view him as a starter type. So I think, at this point for him, he just goes in and just works and, just do the best he can in this open competition, it seems like, because, I mean, you look at the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation, Deshaun Watson's still hurt. Joe Flacco is a capable starting quarterback, but he's older. Kenny Pickett has started in Pittsburgh, but served more as a backup. And Philly, and I don't really expect him to be a long-term starter. So for Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel who went ahead of him, I mean, it's not unrealistic to see either of those rookies compete for playing time and at some point suiting up as a starting quarterback for Cleveland. Just based on the roster building and what they have at quarterback right now, it seems like it's another rebuilding year in Cleveland.
Talking NFL draft, Devin Jackson is our guest here. Which team did you look at this draft and say, I like what they did? Like, is there any one or two that you thought, in your opinion, did the best job with their 7 picks or a trade or whatever?
Yeah, I think, two teams that come to mind in kind of in opposite conferences, but I'll go with the New England Patriots. I really like what they did, in getting and upgrading their offensive line. They invested a couple of pieces, young players into the offensive line, getting Jarrett Wilson and getting Will Campbell, two of the better offensive linemen in the draft process. But then also surrounding, Drake May with some weapons. They got Kyle Williams, I believe, early in that third round. They added a few more pieces, in terms of receivers and tight ends. So you really like what New England did in putting together a really good draft class. And then I'll go to Tampa Bay. I feel like Tampa Bay, when you think about the best drafting teams, you always think about the Ravens and Eagles, always finding value, always finding really good players. But I really like what Tampa did, and getting Emeka Egbuka in the first round. That was a bit of a surprise and probably would have been, one of the bigger surprises in the first round, just in general, had the Giants not traded up for Jackson Dart, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second. But I really like what Tampa did. With that, they took Benjamin Morrison, the defensive back from Notre Dame, who kind of had a, pre-draft process where he was injured, had hip surgery. So you're a little bit uncertain, but I like the swing on him. And then the day 3 picks that they brought in, David Walker, the Central Arkansas edge, and Elijah Roberts, he's a kind of a versatile defensive end, defensive lineman. I really like what they did overall. They found value in every single pick and guys that could contribute right away, in a team that is trying to kind of expand its window of, making the playoffs and potentially contending for a championship. So I think New England got off to a strong start in their rebuild, and I think Tampa has done a really nice job in sustaining their success and drafting really well.
You mentioned the Giants. Let's talk the Giants. I loved the Giants draft. Jackson Dart gets the big headline around here because he was a high school kid in my home state, and then obviously went to USC, ended up at Ole Miss, and the Giants trade back into the latter part of the first round to get him. I also like Darius Alexander. Cam Scatterbo was a problem for everybody in the Big 12 conference this year. BYU and Utah both had to deal with him, and then, of course, Arizona State won the conference championship. And Abdul Carter I think for a lot of people, he was like the player in this draft. If you don't go by need, he seems to be like the biggest surefire hit for most people. So, like I know as a Philly guy, you might not enjoy talking about the Giants having a great draft, but am I missing anything here? Or was this a great draft for the Giants?
It really was a great draft. I really think if you look outside of the haul that New England got, you can make an argument that the Giants had one of the better draft hauls, and getting a quarterback of the future, and get him in the first round, get him on a team control 5th-year option, which I think is going to be important for them, but mostly getting guys that can be impact players immediately as well. I think that's another important caveat is that you want to be able to compete right away. And for a team, the Giants, I think we talked about it in the pre-draft process as a team that really needed to draft well and really needed to kind of figure out what they were going to do because it's not like the coaching staff has a lot of room for error. So I think the Giants did this themselves, a real strong service of drafting really well. And also addressing some needs, along the offensive line. They added Marcus Bowe from Purdue in the 5th round, which I thought was great value, probably one of my favorite picks that they made throughout the draft. So I really like the Giants did. I like Thomas Fidone, the tight end from Nebraska. He's a guy that I really liked in the pre-draft process, and I think, maybe in a few years he could be something, special for the Giants. But yeah, they did some really nice things. They added some weapons. Both on the, obviously at tight end late in the process, but also getting Cam Scatterbo being more of that change of pace, powerful back. They had Tyrone Tracy, who was a convert from receiver to running back last year. And he did some really nice things for them, but having Scatterbo is more of that true power back, I think it's going to bring some real toughness to their offense and, bring another dimension for a team that, kind of needs to win now.
Was there a team that you looked at their draft haul and said, what are these guys doing? Like a head scratcher.
Yeah, I would look at the Houston Texans as a team because I thought they started off really, really strong. They had some really good picks to start off the draft, but then, as you got through the haul, you're just kind of confused in what the exact direction was. It just felt like they were kind of picking duplicate picks. They were picking positions that really didn't seem like big needs for them. They're kind of reaching on guys, I would say, too. I look at a few of the picks that they made, in the third and fourth round, Jalen Smith, the defensive back from USC, who plays some nickel, plays some safety and corner, but he was expected more to be more in the fifth or sixth round range. Woody Marks is a solid player, but I don't think, I thought they could use some more, continue to add more weapons, maybe target a tight end, and they didn't do so until the seventh round. So I was a little bit confused with them, what they ended up doing. And then the Minnesota Vikings, I thought they would try and get some more assets for what they have right now, and it just felt like they kind of couldn't really get a lot of deals done, and they came into the draft with 4 draft picks. And I think they finished the day, I think, selecting 5 players maybe. Yeah, they selected just 5 players throughout the process and, really added maybe 2 guys that can start and play immediately for them. I like their first-round pick in Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. I think he's a plug-and-play player. But you look at the rest of their draft haul, I don't know if any of these guys are going to make an immediate impact. And you thought you might get some more weapons, added, maybe draft a running back, with a premium pick. And continue to add weapons around J.J. McCarthy, a young quarterback that's likely going to be starting in his first year. And it just feels like, obviously, they have Justin Jefferson and have a talented receiving core already. But, I just felt like the running back room just is kind of a net neutral right now. And, I just don't feel like they came out of the draft getting stronger at some of the core positions that they needed to upgrade.
Is there a guy whose name has come off the undrafted free agent board, so to speak? Someone that signed and you're like, okay, I know this individual should have been drafted, will be a factor in the NFL, regardless of team, division, whoever. Is there a player you loved from college that didn't get his name called by the draft, but you think is going to be a success?
Yeah, I think 2 players come to mind for me in terms of, players that probably should have been drafted, but ended up not getting drafted. I'll start with Logan Brown, the tackle from Kansas, a guy that's extremely talented, really has some nice footwork, nice athleticism. He got signed by the Vikings as a UDFA. And, one of the few, I know I just talked about the Vikings not having a great draft class, but I thought this was a great move for them, getting a developmental tackle, a guy that they can kind of mold and, kind of find a long-term answer. I know Christian Darrisaw, especially at left tackle, has been banged up the last few years. So they have some decisions to make, along their tackles. But I really like Logan Brown. I think he's one of the better, guys, that didn't get drafted, had draftable grades from everything I heard, and a player that I think can make an immediate impact. So I like what he brings to the table. And then I'll go, small guy that's kind of local to the Philly area, but Villanova defensive back Isaac Waxter. I think he's a guy that, he's joined the Seattle secondary that, they put a lot of resources into players, but, teams had talked to him in the pre-draft process about playing safety, about playing nickel, playing corner. He's a bigger corner, and kind of reminiscent of some of the guys that you saw in the Legion of Boom era in Seattle, where you had longer athletic defensive backs that can play on the outside. So, I think for him, he's obviously got a uphill climb trying to join a secondary that, has multiple draft picks in it and veteran players. But I think, he's a guy that can make the roster, can add some special teams impact as well, and a guy that I really like in this process, and I think teams are going to kind of find a gem in him, specifically in Seattle, and even if he doesn't stick in Seattle, I think he's got a chance to have a long NFL career, and I think he's going to start games at corner at some point in his career.
Last thing before I let you go, is there any lesson to be learned by the unfortunate situation surrounding Shedeur, like all of it, with the spotlight that we put on him as an athlete, the spotlight that he and his family really embraced, didn't hire an agent, had their own draft party, built the room, like all the branding and all that, the all access media, the cameras following and stuff. It seems like the NFL doesn't love that. Is there a lesson here for future draft picks in what you should and should not do leading up to the draft?
Yeah, I think, sometimes the gamble of the way that you do things, can backfire. And I think this is kind of the way you can take away from it, and just that sometimes going the untraditional route can work, but other times it might not. Sometimes the NFL is one of those leagues that you kind of have to play by their rules a little bit. And I know, with Shedeur and Deion Sanders, obviously having a long NFL career, being a Hall of Famer, and being well known throughout the league, I think there's got to be more, obviously to it. It's more than just a play on the field, but the character fits and being able to present yourself the best you can in front of NFL, executives, no matter who they are, just because the league is relatively big, but everyone talks. So I think, you learn a little bit on both sides, and the fact that maybe the way you handle things, in college isn't going to always translate to the NFL, but also vice versa, sticking true to yourself and who you are, I think, is what's going to shine through best. So I think you got to strike that balance in wanting to be independent, being the person that you are, and showcase the best way that you can, whether it's, on social media or with these meetings with NFL teams. But I also think just in general, especially a high profile position like quarterback, everything is going to be, managed. Everything's going to be under a microscope. Everything's going to be, 100 times more watched, versus other positions in the draft. And I think, at quarterback, if there's a lot of noise around you, NFL teams tend to shy away from that, whether it's positive or negative. I just think, it's one of those things in the league where I feel like you just got to play by their rules, even if, it may not be what you're looking to do or the way that you want to approach it. But at the end of the day, they make these decisions to invest in a player. And millions of dollars are always on the line, and, for a first round pick versus, a guy that goes in the 5th or 6th round. So I think, I'm sure the Sanders family may feel, a certain way about the way that they manage throughout this process. But at the end of the day, all that's behind them now, and all they can do is focus on what's coming next, and, and being in an NFL camp and, trying to make a name of themselves, and it was, I think, and overall, for the Sanders family, I mean, Shiloh Sanders got a free agent deal, the brother of Shedeur Sanders. So all in all, they're in NFL, but maybe not exactly where they want to go. And sometimes those decisions that you make, and, maybe not having an agent, maybe not going through the traditional draft process, can end up not going in the best favor for you.
Devin, appreciate your time as always. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Sean.
Devin Jackson, NFL Draft Insider. He's been really helpful for us these last few weeks. Goes deep on his draft analysis. NFL draft writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which, by the way, Philadelphia, for those who are interested and invested in the future of young Britton Covey, they did not draft anything near his position effectively. So I know that there are folks who they already have the future punt returner. They can do it with Cooper DeJean or whatever. If you saw them draft a speedy wide receiver, you probably get a little bit worried, or went high in the draft to get a corner. Those guys are usually the punt returners. They got a corner, but it was late in the draft, so I don't think, at least from that standpoint, anything extra for Britton Covey to worry about. All right, don't make me tell you to do it over and over again, people. Walk outside, turn around, look at your roof. If it's a little bit shiny, that means the granules have been coming off your shingles, and it's probably time to get someone out there to check it out. Also, while you're out there, look at your gutters. If they're a little banged up, if the downspouts are shaky and maybe hanging off, Top Local Roofing can take care of that for you as well. In fact, they will take care of that for you. 50% off high-quality gutters, seamless gutters, a whole system of them if you purchase a roof. 801-839-4501. We had a little rain this weekend, all right? The beautiful weather gave way to a little bit of rain. If anything is even close to leaking, if you're getting drips in places you don't want drips, if those gutters are pouring the water onto the driveway instead of off to the side of the driveway, give them a call at 801-839-4501. It's a roofing company you trust with everything under the roof. It's Top Local Roofing. Justin and Eugene, they're my guys. They will take care of you. Tell them OC sent you when you call 801-839-4501. All right, we talked about it exactly an hour ago, speculating on worst-case scenario, and unfortunately we got confirmation on worst-case scenario for Dame Lillard. We'll talk about that next. ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Sean O'Connell Show here, wrapping up hour number 2. Rafael Barlow is going to join us, talk some NBA and NBA draft to start hour number 3. Speaking of the NBA, we gave you the report about an hour ago during the hot lunch that Damian Lillard's injury was suspected to be a torn Achilles. And unfortunately, in the interim between when we talked about that and now, Damian Lillard, it's confirmed. Achilles tear. He's out indefinitely. It will have to be surgically repaired. Huge bummer, but not unexpected. D-Lil gone for the rest of these playoffs, and that's a massive blow for the Milwaukee Bucks, obviously.
Yeah, it's terrible. As I said during the hot lunch an hour ago, gutting for us in particular here in the state of Utah, because even though he never played for the Jazz, he did play collegiately here. He has expressed his affection for the state and for Ogden in particular over and over again. So we think he's one of ours. We think he's a Utah Jazz great, even though he never played, right? And so it's gutting to hear that here for us here in the state of Utah. Certainly for the Milwaukee Bucks, no Dame time for the rest of the playoffs, OC. That sucks.
Just a bad situation for not only Dame, but for Giannis as well, because the window doesn't stay open in the NBA.
It's closing rapidly for Milwaukee.
If you don't have like multiple guys that you can rely on in important junctures in games, as talented as the Greek Freak is, there's nobody left in the NBA. There's no team left in the NBA that is a single player driven, right? I mean, Miami was almost that last year, but you got to give some respect to guys like Tyler Herro and like
Bam's been a multi-time All-Star, but yeah, I mean that's probably been the closest one that we've seen go to an NBA Finals recently.
And by the way, it's probably like I don't think in my lifetime there's really been a team that was one single player driven into like that level of success. I mean, in the 90s, you were expected to have a star and a good supporting cast, right? The Jazz were lucky enough to have 2 star players and still never won a finals. The Bulls had the star, and then they had 2 guys with him that would have been stars and at times were the number 1 stars on their team. The Knicks had Patrick Ewing, and John Starks was close behind, and Charles Oakley had a couple years where he was really dang good. Hakeem Olajuwon was the driving force for the Rockets, but they had a bunch of like shooting guards that made his life a lot better as well. And unfortunately now Milwaukee, and they just have to mourn what this season and maybe this era could have been if he'd been able to stay healthy. Because this isn't the only thing that's affected his health. Obviously, he had the thrombosis that he just got cleared from.
Yeah, people were speculating, and again, this is just speculation, and sometimes this is pretty unfair. But it stands to reason that because he couldn't do much basketball-wise because of the blood clot, which, breaking news, that's what deep vein thrombosis means, is there's blood clot. Because he wasn't able to really run, let alone do any basketball stuff, people are wondering if this Achilles injury is an unfortunate byproduct of the blood clot. And I think it stands to reason that it might be. And it's just really unfortunate. Also,
you know what sucks? The blood clot in his right calf.
Yeah.
This his left.
Yeah. So he's got 2 legs that's had serious problems. Now he's been cleared of the blood clot. So hopefully that doesn't come back. But yeah. The other thing about this is let's not let Doc Rivers off the hook. They have been terribly coached. Really since he took over midway through last season, but especially in this playoff series. No, there's hardly any offensive strategy to speak of if you watch the game. Well, Rick Carlisle is running circles around him, one of the best offensive coaches of his era of all time, Rick Carlisle. The Pacers look like they play in a different league than the Bucks because they're just prepared. I don't think the Bucks have been prepared. So that's another sucky thing for Giannis is that his coach is terrible.
All right, got to take a quick one. That's the end of hour number 2. Hour number 3 begins with Rafael Barlow, NBA Draft Insider. Before we get out of here, though, reminder that Festival of Tees, powered by the Utah Golf Association, means that 42 minutes from now, we're giving away 18 holes to the Nibley Park Golf Course. We give them away on Down and Dirty. We give them away right here. We give them away on the Drive with Spence Checketts because of the Utah Golf Association. All right. Rafael Barlow next on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.
Cunningham driving, pull-up jumper, no good. Harris battling, loose ball on the floor, picked up Hardaway, 2 seconds left, puts up the shot, no, and the game is over. J.B. Bickerstaff is on the floor irate. He thought there should have been a foul called on the Hardaway shot. But the Knicks have won it 94-93 and take a 3-1 series lead.
That was a game-sealing stop, Game 4 for the Knicks against the Pistons in Detroit. Sound courtesy of ESPN. Dave Pasch on the call. Knicks now lead the series 3-1. The NBA playoffs can be found right here on ESPN 792.1 FM. Our next broadcast of NBA playoff basketball will be Game 5 of Lakers and T-Wolves on Wednesday night. Checking in on the association now, Rafael Barlow's kind enough to join us, NBA draft consultant, host at NBA Big Board. We'll talk all things hoop here. Rafael, welcome to the show for the first time. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you giving us some time. Let's start with these playoffs. What series is holding your attention most right now?
Oh, man, there's two. The Lakers-Wolves series. That's interesting. Just the fact that Luka or LeBron or Anthony Edwards is going to be out in the first round, which is, 3-1 right now, looking like the Lakers, after all the talk of the trade and J.J. Redick's a genius, seeing them down 3-1 is interesting. And then the Pistons-Knicks series has been pretty entertaining also. I find myself rooting for Detroit for some reason. And I think that series could, go either way, just a couple plays here and there.
Where is Anthony Edwards right now in terms of, like, your top 10 NBA players? Because obviously a series like he's having, especially coming off that last game against LeBron, against Luka, against other NBA greats, can kind of elevate you in that conversation. What is this young man in terms of, like, the top guys in the league as an individual player?
I struggle with ranking players because it changes from series to series. Like Luka went to the finals last year, and he was better than Ant and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the playoffs. I mean, I'd say somewhere in the top 5. If I'm rooting against Anthony Edwards, he's a guy that I fear every time he has the ball in his hands. And so I think it's safe to say he's in the top 5. And, I mean, by the end of this season, people may say he could be the best player in the league. Who knows?
Well, he's fun to watch one way or another. That's he's appointment viewing, I think, which when is the last time we saw that in Minnesota? I guess you could have made the case for Kevin Garnett back in the day, but pretty cool that they've got a special thing going on right now. And yeah, I'm fascinated with the whole – because let me ask you this. Does it soften the blow for Dallas if Luka and LeBron make an exit right here?
No, I mean, I live in Dallas, and just seeing just some of the chatter on Twitter, like the fan base loves Luka. He could do no wrong. And I even saw people saying, like, man, Luka went from being loved in Dallas, and after one game, the Laker fans are being hard on him, and that would have never happened here. I don't think it softens the blow. I don't really know anything other than a championship, just by just the temperature around here. But it's just interesting how this whole thing has unfolded, and they're on the brink of elimination.
All right, let's talk about this upcoming NBA draft. That's a huge point of interest right now, unfortunately, in Salt Lake City, because you don't get to have a horse in the race. Your Jazz are on the sideline, and we knew about 20 games into the year that's what it was going to be like when the playoffs rolled around. They tanked it all the way to the worst record, the top odds, tied for the top odds for this upcoming NBA draft, in hopes that Cooper Flagg will be the guy that you can build around in the long-term future. And it seems to be a consensus opinion that he is worth that kind of an effort. He's worth sacrificing a whole NBA season for if you can make it happen. Do you hold that opinion of Cooper Flagg?
I do. And you mentioned that it was kind of like a rough season. I'm like, well, there's possibly light at the end of the tunnel. I think Flagg is the type of prospect that could turn things around pretty quickly. And so with the Jazz, they have obviously tied for the best odds to get him. and you worked hard for it. And so I think there's a reason to be optimistic if you're in Utah.
Is there anyone else in this draft? Because obviously, the number one pick would be Flag, and it's like, yeah, that's what you want. That made this whole thing worth it. It's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. It is a draft lottery. Last year's pick, they were 2 spots lower than what they were supposed to be. So is there anyone else in this draft that can be a foundational piece for a franchise turnaround, knowing what the Jazz have on the roster right now, knowing that they've extended Lowry Markkanen, they really like him. Walker Kessler is emerging as a great role player in the NBA. Is there anyone else in this draft that you look at and you could say, yeah, if they get him instead of Cooper Flag, they can really build something?
Yeah, to me, the clear-cut number 2 prospect in this class is Dylan Harper from Rutgers. I know Isaiah Collier had a pretty strong season, and he figures to be in the mix. But I think Harper could be your point guard of the future. I actually think him and Keontae George could play together and complement each other simply because Harper is listed at like 6'6", 220, and he's the type of aggressive downhill finisher that can collapse the defense. And I'm a big Harper fan. I'm a really big Dylan Harper fan, and I think he could be your franchise point guard of the future.
Is there any concern, outside looking in for the Utah Jazz even if you have a successful, effort here and you get the top pick, people don't want to be in Salt Lake City. This is an insecurity that we have as a community here, that especially in the NBA, when you've found a diamond in the rough, when you found like a Donovan Mitchell and things were working out and you built an all-star and he was a nice compliment to Rudy, then like that whole thing fell apart and you got great assets back for the Rudy Gobert situation, but it's like a painful thing when your Gordon Hayward, who's the best player on your team, decides he's going to leave. And when Donovan Mitchell says, you know what, I had fun here, but it's time for me to move on. Is that something that Utah and Salt Lake City have to compete with in addition to, the odds and everyone else in the NBA?
I mean, you hear that, but I think the situation between Gordon Hayward and Donovan Mitchell is totally different. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think if Hayward would have not went to restricted free agency, I think that, I don't know if it was restricted, but I guess he didn't get the contract that he wanted, and it kind of bit the Jazz in the butt a little bit. But I think he probably would have more than likely stayed. Mitchell, it seemed like everything was going fine, and on the rumors, him and Rudy didn't get along. So I get it, but I've been to Salt Lake a few times and I actually enjoy it. I mean, it's beautiful. And so I think if you're winning, it can cure things, and it's just unfortunate that the Rudy and Donovan combination just couldn't make it work.
Back to the NBA playoffs, and I guess this still does apply to the draft and the guys that are coming up. But, LeBron James has been the greatest player in the league for a long time. He's 40, and now the conversation is, well, he might not be the best player in the league anymore, so who's next? And Steph Curry's not getting any younger. And, like, that generation of super elite stars is kind of aging out. Do we know the obvious replacements? Like, who's going to be the face of the NBA? Who are going to be the guys that carry this league forward in the next 5 years? Because, I mean, I don't think LeBron's done this year. Maybe he is. But he's not playing in 5 years.
Hey, people said that 5 years ago. I remember seeing a tweet in, 2015, and this guy was saying, this LeBron dominance is not going to last too much longer. And here we are, 2025, and he still had a good year. I think the league has been spoiled, from obviously the Magic and Bird to Jordan, Shaq. I think the league has guys that have the talent to be the face of the league, but either they just don't want it or just aren't or don't care to be as marketable. Like Jokic has won 3 MVPs, but he's not – I don't want to say he's not marketable, but he doesn't have that same appeal as LeBron. He's not looking to be a spokesman that pitches a bunch of products. Anthony Edwards probably has everything that it takes, but he's had his own controversies off the floor. I think Ja Morant, when he's healthy, is exciting. He's the type of player that people may want to pay to watch, but he's had his own controversies. Luka doesn't really care about really pitching products, and so I think the league is in a good situation as far as talent standpoint, but they've just been spoiled with the Jordans and LeBrons and Kobe's and Shaq's, the guys that had the personalities to match being the face of the league. And I think with this generation, guys just don't necessarily want it.
It's interesting because there's so much we have these like broad sweeping conversations about how the young kids now are more about branding and their social media and all this stuff than any of these veterans are. But I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but now we're talking about guys who have an opportunity to maybe be great players, but also brand themselves as, a big time endorser, as a face of the league, as a whatever. And there's reluctance there, at least among the elite guys that you're talking about. It's a disconnect from one of the big narratives in sports, is I guess why I'm pointing it out. Is that unique to just these individual players in your mind? Or could it be something where we've kind of learned that, hey, it actually sucks to be in the spotlight all the time, and that's the reason they reject it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as weird as it may sound, I think somebody's going to have to embrace the Allen Iverson villain of, look, I don't want to be the face of the league, and people may gravitate towards I don't want to necessarily say the bad guy, but the guy that just does the opposite of Jordan. I mean, you remember Jordan wore suits, and then Iverson came in with the hip-hop generation, and it just kind of, it caused some backlash for sure, but it just kind of changed the narrative of the league. And so, yeah, maybe some guys don't want to be the face because you see how LeBron is. I mean, you see every day that people are consistently comparing to LeBron to Jordan. No matter what he does, he's always in comparison. And I think, as great as LeBron is, it's just crazy how there's such a divide if you are a Jordan fan that some people feel like they can't like both. And I blame the media in a sense. And so, and maybe that's why some guys just really don't care to carry the mantle or want the pressure of being the face of the NBA.
Are you a Jordan or a LeBron guy?
I'm both. Like, I don't feel like you need to be divided. But
wait a second.
Take a hard line.
Is that an option? Can you be both? Can you appreciate what both of them did and have done for the NBA? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I've ever heard that response before.
They've never played against each other in the finals. They never. They're like two totally different generations, and I just love basketball. So I like both, and I think they both have a case to be the GOAT. I mean, obviously Jordan's finals record is one thing, but to me, in total honesty, if you go resume for resume, who has a better resume than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
Yeah, I
don't think he gets
guys like Kareem and Bill Russell. I mean, it's funny that we've narrowed down the GOAT conversation to those two players, and I think it's for pretty obvious reasons because of media coverage and how can most of us speak from an informed perspective on watching Wilt Chamberlain. You know what I mean? But it is a wild thing how many guys probably belong in the conversation when only two are. Who's the next person to insert themselves into that conversation? Because it's he's either super young in the NBA right now or he's not in the NBA yet, in my opinion.
Well, I think Cade Cunningham has a chance to be in that discussion down the line. Obviously, Cooper Flagg has the potential to be like this crossover star, a guy that you may be familiar with that played his high school basketball. I don't know how many games he actually played in Utah, but he's going to BYU next year. AJ DeVance, I think he has the athleticism, the wing position is like the glamour position as far as being the face of the league. He has the size, the athleticism, the skill set. He could be someone that you can talk about. I really like Darren Peterson. I mean, it's crazy that I'm talking about a kid that hasn't even graduated high school yet as possibly being the face of the league. But, there's something special about him. It's just, I mean, you never know. You just never know who can come out of nowhere.
Is Victor Wembanyama going to be one of these guys that we have to be like, oh, what might have been? Because, you know, he's so young, and now he's got the thrombosis, which in the upper body is not supposed to be a long-term issue, and obviously the Spurs didn't want to risk anything, and playoffs weren't really in the picture for them this year. So, but do we trust that Victor Wembanyama is going to stay healthy enough that we get to enjoy the fullness of his potential?
I mean, I think so, and of course I hope so. I mean, you know, whenever you hear blood clot, it sounds scary, but I think it's the same injury that Brandon Ingram had recently and Asua Thompson for the Pistons. I spoke with his agent recently, and he said that it's no big deal, that Victor's fine, and he just kind of explained to me how Victor found out about it. But I mean, I really hope so, because Victor is special, and he does have the personality as far as just being really well spoken and the image, and then of course by him being French, there's, you know, the international appeal. So I do think that he could be the face of the league, but for whatever reasons, I just think the fans are probably going to gravitate more towards like the athletic wing, because maybe that seems more realistic than a 7'5" guy that's, you know, dunking like it's a Nerf hoop.
Yeah.
But that just what makes Victor so unique.
It's very hard for you to feel like you relate to someone who is built like an avatar, where you're just like that.
Yeah.
Every kid in you know, on the playground can go pretend that they're Steph Curry and just huck them up from anywhere. Nobody gets to be like, watch this. I can stand flat-footed and still touch the rim. It's bananas.
Yeah. And even with Steph Curry, I think he's done a lot of good for the game. But if you watch youth basketball, I think there's too many kids that think that they can beat Steph Curry.
That's a parental problem too, because they're like, hey, you're gonna be 6 feet tall, so you better shoot like Steph. You're not gonna be able to dunk like LeBron. So that might be everyone's fault that's watching basketball.
I don't want to sound like an old head that just is anti-new generation, but nothing burns me up more than transition three-pointers. And I hate it in the NBA, and I hate when I see kids shoot transition three-pointers, off the dribble transition three-pointers. Like, only Steph.
I have watched games with coaches and former coaches that if a three-point shot goes up and there's like, you know, 21 seconds on a shot clock, you could just watch their blood boiling. They just can't stand it. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's a generational difference, but in the NBA, I had an assistant coach tell me you have to shoot 30 to 40 threes per game to be competitive.
That's insane. How many of the teams active in the NBA playoffs right now are legitimate championship contenders in your mind?
Oh, man, I think you can say everybody in the Western Conference that's still alive right now. I mean, if you're Denver, you know you have a chance with Jokic. If you're the Clippers, I mean, Kawhi's playing his best basketball in years. James Harden is playing well. Obviously, the Thunder have to feel comfortable where they're at. I mean, Lakers are down 3-1, but when you got Luka and LeBron on your team, I mean, you still can be optimistic there. It's wide open in the West. And I think Boston's going to come out of the East, but I mean, I think Cleveland could give Boston some issues. Maybe there's some size problems there, but at least in the backcourt. But I mean, I think it's just wide open, which is, on one hand, I think is good for the diehard basketball fans, but history shows that, you know, the NBA probably does its best ratings-wise when there's a dynasty, like, you know, when Jordan and the Bulls and you had the Warriors run. So I'm a little torn about that because I like the parity, but I understand why people like dynasties.
Yeah, I'm a parody guy. I want to be able to tune in to whatever sport I'm watching and not know who's going to win already. Like, I get we have familiarity and comfort with familiarity, but I prefer when there's actual parity and it's something that it's an unforeseen outcome. Like, I don't know if that makes me root for underdogs more often, but it's a fascinating time in the NBA. And by the way, we're in the playoffs now after a regular season where there was like all this to do about ratings suffering and, the league being more focused on non-basketball things than what they needed to be focused on. A lot of that has died down since the playoffs started because these playoffs have been pretty interesting. Was that boredom? What was it that made us focus on those storylines and that negativity for the NBA season?
Well, I think it's just access to the games. I live in Dallas, and in order to watch Dallas Mavericks home games, and luckily I have a media pass so I can go to all the games, but I had to pay for Mavs TV. I think it's $16 a month. And so if you figure a city like Dallas, which is a top 5 TV market, and fans don't have access to watch their local team play, you have to pay for another subscription, I think you lose hundreds of thousands of people, and then it just kind of adds up. I remember J.J. Redick saying in an interview that his family doesn't have Spectrum, or they have to go through a couple steps to access it. He's like, yeah, I could do it. I have to set it up, and I think Spectrum is one of the Lakers' TV sponsors or something like that. But he's like, it's not just as easy as turning on the TV and watching the games. And with the playoffs, it has been a lot easier for fans to watch games. So I think that's part of the ratings issue. And then I just feel like negativity sells, I think the NBA set an attendance record last year, but if you talk about that, nobody cares. But if you say the ratings are bad, then it leads to chatter, generational gaps that say, well, they don't play hard anymore, or when Jordan played, the ratings were good. When LeBron, it just leads to clicks and, clickbait topics drive traffic, and it gets the algorithm moving. So it's just the era that we live in.
All right, this will be the last thing before I let you go, I promise. But we here in Utah, we claim Damian Lillard because of his college days and the fact that, he comes back and graces us with his presence every now and again, still active in the community on certain levels. And obviously the bad news is that he's torn his Achilles tendon. He's not young in the NBA, in NBA terms anymore. So I know you're not a doctor, but pretend you are and tell me what this means for Damian Lillard's future in the NBA.
Well, Damian Lillard has made a lot of money, and I want to say he has 2 or 3 years left on his contract. Thankfully for him, he can shoot, and so his game isn't just built off of explosiveness and athleticism anymore. He was already somewhat on the decline. I think the days of him being an elite player are behind him. I'm rooting for Dame. He's a guy that has just done things the right way his entire career. Hopefully he can bounce back, but I just think, unfortunately, with his injury, I think it may expedite the whole Giannis leaving Milwaukee chatter, and I think that's going to get magnified over the next few weeks. And if you're Portland, if you're a Blazers fan, of course you don't want to see Dame go out like this, but with the Blazers owning Milwaukee's picks or the opportunity for a pick swap, I think the Blazers could be pretty interesting because now they have some draft capital that could be better than what they probably expected.
That's a point I had not even thought about yet. So all the more reason to keep picking your brain. Raphael, thank you so much for the time today. Appreciate you and all the insight.
No problem. Anytime you want to talk draft, I know it's big for Utah, just let me know. We can make it happen.
All right. We'll have you on again for sure before that happens and right around draft lottery too. Raphael Barlow, NBA draft consultant, host of NBA Big Board Global Scouting, and obviously a guy who's very, very dialed in on all things happening in and around the NBA and the draft. Big thanks to Raphael for coming on. James, that's one James Peterson bonus point for you for getting Raphael Barlow as a guest. Well done. Sean O'Connell
collecting
show
all the points
on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Just a great song, no matter what. Welcome back to the Sean O'Connell Show. We are counting down. We're 10 minutes away from giving away 18 holes to Nibley Park Golf Course in our Festival of Tees powered by the Utah Golf Association. I will have a trivia question for you. You will answer that question, and you will get 18 holes at Nibley Park.
All right. You will like it.
You will.
I have a trivia question for you. You will answer that question, and if you get it right, you will love the prize, Nibley Park. Why wouldn't you? It's Nibley Park.
So we started the show today talking about the sort of discouraging performance of local universities players in the draft. Jalen Royals got picked in the 4th round. Caleb Lohner got picked in the 7th round with pick 241, and nobody else got drafted. You had some guys with high school connections to the University of Utah, but BYU, Utah State, Weber State, Southern Utah didn't really churn out the draft picks this year. Now, that's normal-ish, especially when Utah's coming off a really bad year. But you cannot help, at least I cannot help, but think about what this draft may have looked like if you'd have kept the band all together and healthy. You know what I mean? Brant Keithy, no news so far on whether or not he's going to be able to continue at the pro level. Cam Rising has been I want someone to do like a little mini documentary on not only Cam Rising, but the disappearance of Cam Rising after this season and really midway through this season. We haven't seen or heard a peep from the Cam Rising camp. Last week on Instagram, somebody else posted a picture. I think it was it Dorian Singer? Posted a picture of himself and Cam Rising, like from a game. I don't even know if it was Dorian. Somebody posted a Cam Rising picture.
Former Utah teammate, yeah.
And then Cam, like, reposted it, and that was it. No comment.
Well,
nothing. Like, is Cam blink twice if you're safe.
Yeah, he was at the Utah Royals game. I think it's now 10 days ago. There was a picture that surfaced of him on social media with, I believe it was Devin Kafusi and a couple other guys.
All right, cool.
But that's it. Like,
I wish him well.
Yeah.
I really do. I hope that this is what he wants.
We'd love to have him on the show to talk about what his future is too, because we have not seen any commitment to another college team, and the draft is over. Have not heard any news about whether a team's interested in signing him as an undrafted free agent. He obviously wasn't drafted. Is he interested in the UFL? We'd love to have him on the show. Maybe I'll lob a text out to him, and maybe you can try too to see if he's willing to come on now that he's made a couple of appearances on social media.
Yeah, I guess.
And at a Royals game.
Okay, so I put poll questions out today in response to the free agent signings, guys getting opportunities. The lack of free agent signings for some of these guys is truly surprising.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just got a fantastic I just did a little bit of research. Fantastic news for our show and Jeff Schwartz.
Okay.
Caleb Lohner, 7th round, 241st pick. Jeff Schwartz, 7th round. We'll see what he thinks about him. About Caleb Lohner joining him in the 241 club.
All right, that's fantastic. I put the questions out. What do you see as the future, the pro football future for these guys? And I know we're bad at this because we have affection for these individuals. We root for their success. Our predictive qualities when it comes to the optimistic outlook for players moving on to the next level make us dumb, quite frankly. But I still want to get your thoughts, James, because if you sound dumb, it doesn't hurt me, okay?
Fair enough. That's good logic.
By the way, I put a poll out last week about Travis Hunter being the number 2 pick in the haul that the Jaguars gave up to get him, and 67% of our listeners think that was a reach and that he will not justify the trade and the draft picks that they gave up, which shocked me. Anyway, all right, so I'm going to give you a few players, and you're going to tell me what you think their future is in pro football. All right, James?
So my choice is active roster, practice squad, UFL.
Yes.
And
active
no
roster,
future.
you practice squad, UFL, or regular job.
Regular job. Okay.
Now, by the
My
way,
job. Maybe that should or James's job.
even coaching is a regular job, and
Yeah.
you
Not playing.
You could, not playing. And by the way, the regular job thing now is totally different because, again, these guys have more time than their forebears in Utah football. There was a long, decades and decades where if you were a bubble guy, if you were a borderline professional, especially if you were someone like is often the case with Utah where you're married already, maybe you have a kid, maybe you have a kid on the way, maybe you have multiple kids, where like you got to figure out what your pro prospects look like, and you have 6 months to figure it out. Now some of these guys have like a couple years worth of money, depending on what their spending habits are like. James, think of how much you spent, like what your rent was. You probably didn't even have a car payment because you were probably driving some beater that was like handed down to you, whatever it was. Like how low cost your living was coming out of college. Now imagine if I gave you like $300,000.
Yeah.
Like how long could you have survived on that based on your college spending? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I could probably still be surviving on
So,
that.
yeah.
Based on my spending habits.
So these guys, like it's a little bit different now, but put that into your equation when you answer this question, okay? Because if you're Karene Reed, who we will start with, you could make an NFL roster this year. I think you're very capable of that. But you could also be like, you know what? I'll be a practice squad guy for like a while, or I'll go do this UFL thing, which is not necessarily like a lucrative living, but I get to keep playing football, and it supplements my 100 or 200 grand that I have left over from playing my college days. So anyway, Karene Reed, what's his future?
And it's more of a more lucrative of a living than you and I get with our regular jobs for a lot of the players. Yeah, I think active NFL roster.
Okay, you think he's going to make an active NFL roster?
I don't know if it's this year. Maybe he's a practice squad guy this year and next year. But I think eventually he's going to stick with an NFL roster. Either as a special teams guy at the very least, or a depth piece in the linebacker room. Maybe a team converts him to safety. I don't know. He's going to stick in an active NFL roster at some point.
I love that he's with the Broncos because the Broncos are a team that scheme versatility for them defensively matters, right? And he's a guy who's got some versatility. And they also have in the past retained players specifically as special teams guys. So Karene Reed, James thinks, is an active NFL roster guy. 42% of people agree with you. 44% think he's going to make a practice squad, and that's still not a bad living.
Are we doing Sean O'Connell show feud? The survey says 42%.
That's a better way. I'm going to start saying survey says.
Survey says.
By the way, for the edification of people who are wondering, like in 2024, for example, a rookie practice squad player earned a minimum of $12,500 per week on the roster, on the practice squad.
And that's not a yearly salary thing. That's just for the season. So
you get paid. So if you're
trying to think what that is as far as a season salary, it's a good amount.
So
12,500 a week. That's pretty good money.
Yeah, most of us would be happy with that on our paychecks. So let's say you're on the practice squad for the entire regular season. I'm not even going to factor in camp or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's $212,000.
That's stupid money for a regular person like me.
That's great money. It's like now look.
Can I get on a practice squad somewhere?
You're cannon fodder. You're getting beat up.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But also in the NFL, they're not like sending the dogs at you. It's not like the starters are trying to murder the practice squad guys.
No.
They just need bodies, right? So that, by the way, $212,000 to be on an NFL practice squad if you're there for we're just making it simple, calculating based on the whole regular season. That's like 3 times what you're going to make in the UFL. The UFL minimum salary is $62,000. And there are guys who make more, a lot of guys making 100 plus, but still, you're talking about three times, maybe double what you're making in the UFL. Anyway, food for thought. So you think Karene Reed's an active roster player. What about Junior Tafuna?
Oh, that's a no-brainer for me. Absolutely active roster player, and I expect using the word expect makes it seem like I don't think there's any doubt he'll be an active NFL roster player this year, but I do expect him to be that as a rookie. So that being said, of course, there's things that can happen that it doesn't work out as a rookie, but he's that good, and he had that good of a pre-draft process. I'd be surprised if he is not as a rookie on the active NFL roster.
Okay, we will hope for that. Survey says that 71% of people feel the same way. Caleb
Let's go.
Lohner.
Caleb Lohner.
Caleb Lohner.
I think he's a practice squad guy.
Okay, 24% of people agree with you.
Yeah, that being said, I would not be surprised if he ends up being a productive tight end on an active NFL roster for a number of years, because we've seen it happen before with guys who primarily played basketball, and in his case only played basketball, and then ended up being really good pass catchers at the tight end position for a long time.
I think you're right. I think that they're by design are going to put him. I think they want him to be a practice squad guy probably for the first year or two.
Yeah, well, that's what it's going to be for the first year or two, and I'm going to say now that the most likely scenario that's his entire career in the NFL, but it's just so hard. As you said, we suck at predicting these things with people who've played football their whole lives. It's even harder to predict for a guy who's barely played any football in his life, but has so much immense potential.
Okay, so Caleb Lohner on the practice squad this year. I don't think I disagree. Tyler Batty from BYU.
I think he's an active NFL roster guy. I think that all of these guys, since they didn't get drafted, there's a chance that as rookies they're not immediately on the NFL roster. But I think the vast majority of his career he's going to be on an NFL roster as at least as special teams or a depth guy in the linebacker room. He's too good, too high character of a guy. And as we've been talking about, we talked about this with Corinne Reed. Okay, the measurables, the drill numbers, okay, they're not outstanding in those, but you put on the tape, they're outstanding football players. I think that's the case with Tyler Batty.
Okay, we'll go quickly through these so we can get to our Festival of Tees giveaway. Van Fillinger.
Probably UFL or practice squad.
Okay.
And I hate to say that because I think he really does have potential to be in the league a long time, but
even split, 33.6% of people think he's active NFL or practice squad. So, Brant Keithy.
I'll say UFL just because I haven't said a UFL yet, and he's talented enough to continue to play football if he can stay healthy. I just don't think he's an NFL guy.
Yeah, regular job is winning for Keithy right now, I think because of the injury concern.
Yeah.
Connor O'Toole.
Connor is I'll go UFL for him too. I'm with Scott Mitchell, who said earlier today it was maddening how injured he was because he has so much potential, but we just don't. No one's seen it yet.
Potential is a curse word in pro sports. It just sucks. Practice squad is the leading answer for Connor O'Toole. Zamiah Vaughn.
I think he's an active NFL roster guy.
Leading answer for Zamiah Vaughn is active NFL roster as well. Mekhi Bernard.
I'll say practice squad, but I would not be surprised if he ends up being an NFL roster guy for the majority of his NFL career because it's a hard worker, guy who commits to whatever role the team needs for him. We talked about that throughout his Utah career.
Super underrated player, in my opinion.
But
practice squad is the leading answer.
Yeah.
And by the way, people don't like the UFL that listen to the show. UFL did not win in one single poll. Not like it's just maybe that's just an awareness thing, but the UFL did not win on any of those. All right, we'll give away some golf. Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM, proud part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, we got some crosstalk coming up, brought to you by Burt Brothers. Burt Brothers does it better. Right now, I'm giving away 18 holes to Nibley Park, part of our Festival of Tees Golf Association celebration, powered by the Utah Golf Association. 877-353-0700. Very simple. Junior Tafuna signed as an undrafted free agent with which NFL team? We talked about it on the show today. Junior Tafuna, who I think most of us thought would be the most likely, like, yes, this Ute is going to get drafted for sure. He wasn't, but he signed as an undrafted free agent with which NFL team? Tell us at 877-353-0700, and you can have 18 holes to Nibley Park. Spence Checketts in the drive are coming up next. He'll be giving away golf on his show as well. Hey, Spence.
Are we concerned that Nibley only has 9 holes? We're giving away 18 to a course that only has 9. Can you play 9 twice?
You play it twice. You go forward and back.
You can play 9 twice.
Yeah.
You can play 9 twice. Okay.
You can, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. No, that's great. I just wanted to make sure that we were setting expectations, deferred gratification for our listeners who, may be expecting something that isn't coming their way.
There's probably so many people be like, this guy is so out of the golf world, he doesn't even know that it's 9 holes. Okay, you know what? Maybe.
I think most people are with you. I think fewer people realize that Nibley only has 9. But deferred gratification, is there a Shitter Sanders topic in there? I think there might be.
Oh, my gosh.
You know what I can't stand about our business? I think it's hilarious where, before the draft last week, you're listening to, the usual suspects, the Fox, the ESPN, NFL guys or whatever. Well, my intel indicates that Shedeur will not slide past Pittsburgh at 21. And he will definitely, the first 6 to 8 picks in the second round is where the floor is for him. And then you're listening to the same jokers the Monday after the draft goes down. And I had several conversations with people over the weekend that indicated Shedeur did this or that, and they're not surprised that he fell to the 5th round. I'm like, you liars. You are all just lying. And look, whether it's the NFL draft or the NBA draft, that is the time where guys like us will get more misinformation from coaches and front office people than any other time, simply because there's just so much at stake, and they don't want to tip their hand. Caleb Lohner being the only local player drafted, who had that on their bingo card?
Jalen Royals went as well.
Excuse me, Utah, BYU. Yeah, shout out to Jalen Royals. And a couple of other former high school kids drafted.
That's
but
right.
The only Cougar and Ute drafted Caleb Lohner in the 7th round.
Yeah, not on anyone's bingo card.
Mm-hmm.
Good for him,
Sure.
Obviously. It's an exciting thing for him. I think that some of the undrafted free agent signings found good situations, hopefully. And then, there's guys that I was like, well, Van is – we have no announcement on Van Fillinger yet, if that's happening or not. No announcement on Brant Keithy, if that's happening or not. And that's, it's a bummer for those guys if they want to pursue professional football opportunities. But now there's alternative pathways, too, with the spring league, the UFL. You can make a little bit of money. You already have a little bit of money. We were just talking about this. So we'll see how it plays out for some of these guys.
With Brant Keithy, it's a real – and I remember – Matt Barkley, USC quarterback, after his junior year, they're like, dude, leave. You're going to be the number 1 pick this year, or you'll be a top 5 pick. He's like, no, I want to come back to college 1 more year. A couple of injuries, struggled. I think he was drafted in like the 6th or 7th round. You have to capitalize when your stock is the highest, and there's so many things that have to fall into place. Like for Brant, it was simply health. Before Dalton Kincaid kind of burst on the scene as the better tight end NFL prospect, it was Brant. He was like that prototypical weapon you could use, and now a guy like Brant Keithy will probably look back and wonder what could have been, where at some point he was projected to be I don't know if he was ever a first or second rounder, but definitely an NFL guy.
Well, the nice thing is if there's a silver lining to it now, Brant Keithy's not hurting for money at this particular moment as a early 20s kind of guy. And that's where NIL has done in some cases what it's supposed to do, where, a guy like that who brought butts in the seats and eyes on the television for Utah football, he got compensated for it. And that's a good thing. I'm here for all the arguments of why it has manifested into something that is not good for college sports as well. But in that particular case, it makes sense.
Well, and the reason it hasn't necessarily, the negative side of NIL honestly has nothing to do with NIL. It really doesn't when you think about it. It has to do with the administrators that are in charge of executing how the payments are made and how it's structured. The very dynamic of being able to pay your employees is not a bad thing. It's the leadership of the NCAA that failed to see this when Ed O'Bannon filed a lawsuit in 2008. You've had 16 years to prepare for this. So I think the dynamic of NIL in and of itself is only positive, but the execution of the way it's gone down has had detrimental effects across the board. And by the way, Sean, we'll continue to until this House versus NCAA settlement gets across the line and administrators like Mark Harlan know exactly what sort of hand they've been dealt. Until those guardrails and guidelines are in place, it's going to continue to be chaotic.
Did I ruin your day?
I guess. I've got 4 hours of radio to do.
Even after that, it's going to be chaos and stupid because you can't unring the bell. College athletes a year from now are going to say, yeah, it's okay that I can just get my share of the $21 million instead of $7 million like Arch Manning is getting in 2025. They're not going to accept that. And their attorneys are not going to accept that. And whatever guardrails are being put in place are going to be challenged legally. And while they're challenged legally, they're not going to be allowed to be enforced. And so it's just you're going to have $21 million coming from the athletic department and another $21 million coming from the boosters. And they're going to have to figure that out. And
well,
that sucks.
I still believe, and I don't know when this is going to happen. We have Matt Brown on today from Extra Points, who's really smart with this stuff. That whether it's in a year or whether it's in 2 or I don't know when it's going to be, the sooner that you just lean into the pro model entirely and allow the players to collectively bargain and have them sign contracts, then I do think we'll see settling of the waters. Now, will old school college football fans ever fully embrace it or accept it? Probably not. You know, the same guys that are yelling about it now will yell about it when this thing is more structured and we do have the ability to negotiate between a governing body and the players and a union. And we come to an agreement about what the contracts look like, and they sign deals where they're at least stand on campus for a couple of years, and they can't just leave if they're bummed out about their playing time. And the payments are more structured as opposed to the chaos that it is now. So I do foresee a day where it settles in, and things change and progress. At some point, we're probably all going to have to accept it, but I don't think there's any argument that over the first, 4 years now, 3.5, 4 years, the collateral damage has been hard for a lot of people to accept.
For sure. You've heard me yelling about it for 3 hours, and now you can tune in for 4 more while Spence does his thing.
Indeed.
That's on the drive.
Good to see you, Sean.
By the way, it's the Houston Texans. That's who picked up Junior Tafuna in free agency. Sean O'Connell's show is over. Stay tuned for the drive. ESPN 700, 92.1 FM, proud part of Utah's ESPN radio network.